Before I start the show, stop everything you're doing right now. Eric Blem's book on Craig Kelly comes out February 27th. Let's put it on the bestsellers list. Go to Amazon, search for Darkest White, and pre-order it right now. You will love this book. The FNRad Snowboard Podcast is presented by Skyview Campers, Never Summer's innovative take on the tiny home. Designed and built in beautiful Colorado, check out skyviewcampers.com. Wired Snowboards builds quality snowboards by hand 10 minutes away from my house. Visit wiredsnowboards.com and order one today. Fixed bindings are easy to adjust, long-lasting, high-performance bindings built to have less impact on the environment. Check out fixedbindingco.com. Rip Curl outerwear is designed to search further in the snow, offering strength, durability, and all-around performance. Rip Curl outerwear's got you covered. New Greens, 100% organic, vibrant green juice. Buy yourself some at newgreens.com and use code FNRad at checkout for 20% off. The Boardroom Snowboard Shop, best selection, best prices, Vancouver's premier snowboard shop. The Boardroom ships to anywhere in North America, so go to boardroomshop.com or visit their stores in Vancouver and North Van. Support also comes from Mount Seymour, Grouse Mountain, Cypress Mountain, the Pro Standard GoPro accessories, and our friends at 1910. You can use code FNRAD at checkout for 20% off at 1910.com. The Havens, a center for transformational learning located on beautiful Gabriola Island. Plan a visit at haven.ca and use code FNRAD at checkout to save 10% off their Come Alive program. Sean Sullivan is a professional snowboard photographer from snowboarding's golden age. Sully joined Snowboarder magazine before they had a senior photographer program and took some of the most iconic snowboard photos of all time. Sully was there for the transition from magazines running snowboarding to videos, DVDs, and eventually social media being the main level of engagement for the core snowboard community. We cover all that plus the time someone tried to steal his name. Enjoy this episode with original legendary snowboard photographer Sean Sullivan.
That was a trip that Snowboarder Mag did to it was like Iceland or something like that. I don't know whether Bud Fawcett went too, but I remember there was a little bit of a dust up because James wasn't a senior photographer.
Oh, interesting.
And we're all like, why is that guy going? If I recall correctly, it's all kind of hazy, but I remember him going on that trip and getting that photo, and that was a pretty once in a lifetime lucky shot to get the skier eating shit.
Yeah, and just eating shit perfectly well.
Mark
is just so styled out. It's so incredible.
That's 1 in a million.
Well, a lot of those shots are 1 in a million, right?
They are. It's true.
I mean, the Jamie Lynn shot.
Yeah.
I just say it, and I know it's in my mind.
The shots that become iconic like that. A lot of them are just for some reason there's some magical thing about them that just captures the imagination of people. The Jamie Lynn shot is interesting because, and we can talk about this more in the interview if you want to bring it up, but that photo wasn't even on the radar the last time we did an interview. That photo I don't think it had ever even been put out.
Is that for real?
Or anything like that. Yeah.
No way.
Or it was just starting to, because that photo was an outtake from this super pipe thing up in Blackcomb.
Okay. Let's
get on that.
Why don't we start there? Because I've become by default this sort of I'm hesitating to say it. I used to hesitate to say I'm a podcaster.
Yeah.
But historian.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bad word a little bit. You know what I mean?
I like the historian. There's history in snowboarding now. But I've done this before where we've started the conversation without recording, and then all this good stuff comes out, and you're like, all right, we got to go talk about it again.
Yeah, we got there.
Sometimes it's not as good the second time around.
Yeah, we're going. Everything's rolling.
All right.
So, over the course of in telling the history of snowboarding, which I'm going to do for season 10, I'm going to try and tell the history of early snowboarding in 25 hours of.
Sure.
Right? And so I think I've got enough time to hit a bunch of things. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about is the evolution of half pipes, obviously.
Sure.
Right? From hand dug from the Donner quarter pipe probably is maybe the absolute first sort of half pipe, quarter pipe
transition
idea,
yeah,
where it was like pretty big. And so Al Clark and Greg Todd's hand dug what most people would call the first super pipe. But you had a super pipe session in 1992?
Something like that, yep.
Yeah, 92, and so much iconic photography and imagery video came out of that event. And I need to ask you, like, start to finish, where did the idea come from? How did you pick Blackcomb? Like, that whole thing.
Sure. So, first of all, you are right. There is another, because for years we were treading on the idea that this was the first ever super pipe, and then, word did come down, and I think there was even a little bit of like, from the Canadian guys who had built another pipe up and like, up in some area what was that area that they used to have?
Brome Ridge.
Yeah, Brome Ridge. That's right.
Yeah,
up by Black Tusk and all that, right?
Yeah, the Brome Ridge super pipe was probably an 18-foot transition, maybe 19-foot transition, but it was like perfect. So
they hand dug it.
And they hand dug it.
Yeah.
But the idea was.
And what year was that?
The same. Oh, that was 97, maybe 96.
Okay.
Like it was quite a bit
several years later.
Oh, way later. But the thing about it was, your super pipe was just like super awesome. Right, as opposed
it was big,
to was it big?
It was big. We were going for those big walls, but we had some issues in the construction process. I mean, big shout out to all the Canadians that came out there and contributed. There's a big crew of guys that came up, and we were trying to keep them stoked. And it was hand dug, but we also there were some guys up there that were doing moving snow in their big tractors and stuff. And we had those guys come in a couple times with the big scooper and kind of shape it out, but. One thing about my pipe, or our pipe at that time, was I say my pipe too because Dano and those guys started calling it Sully's Gully because it was the pipe that was never finished. We never really got it done.
Right.
But what we did accomplish was at various times throughout the 9-10 days we were up there, we would have certain sections of the pipe that would get honed, that were perfect. We'd have one wall, 100 yards of one wall that was so pristine, and we put like that big blue rail up there.
Yep.
And so for 1 or 2 days, this one side would become a killer 2-hit deal. And then as that started to wear out, they'd start working on something over here. And then for a while, we'd have like 2 or 3 hits that were going. And then we'd shape out the first hit, turned into, just a shot of Palmer going really big in this one spot. And
totally.
That's where we had sort of dug out. But it was never... It never had the form of what you look at today as a super pipe. It's perfection.
Right.
There was never anything perfect about it. For that reason, I could see why they would maybe consider the Brome Ridge pipe to be a better and more concrete example of what a super pipe probably was. The first true example.
Yours was a super pipe compared to what was going on in the day.
100%.
And then yours became the regular pipe, like a 12-foot hand dug, or then they started coming up with these augers and tillers that they would make these perfect 12-foot pipes. Then it went to about 14.
Yes.
But then super pipe was like 20 or 22 feet.
Yeah.
So they dug like a 20, like I said, an 18-foot one at Brome Ridge, and then probably the second year like a 20-foot one. But the physics changes there.
Sure.
I think that's what they're claiming, is that the super pipe, as you know what I mean? Like, if you take Shaun White and put him in a 14-foot pipe, you're not getting 30-foot airs.
No,
it's not
True.
possible. But a super pipe being like super big transitions.
Yes.
I think that's what they're claiming.
Yeah.
That they made the first one that was like 18 or whatever. Like that next size up. So yours was a super pipe for the time.
Yes.
Because there was nothing even remotely close to 100 feet long with perfectly shaped walls. That's just not happening.
Yeah.
Right?
And this was before the Pipe Dragon too.
Way before
when the Pipe Dragon came in, and I remember the Pipe Dragon, the first edition came out, was too small. It was one of the smaller ones, and then they made that bigger one.
They put an extension on some
and when
of them.
that bigger Pipe Dragon came out, that was when the super pipes really kind of went ballistic with the evolution of it.
That's it, yeah.
But you are right in the sense that it was a super event.
Yes.
As much as we were going for this amazing pipe.
Yes.
So you're asking me how it got started. Like, I had proposed an idea to Snowboarder. Let's build the ultimate half pipe and get the best riders in the world there. That was the whole notion.
Rad.
Build the best pipe, get the best riders, see what we can muster up. I feel like we accomplished that, but we never did get the perfect pipe going. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit that the thing was an ongoing work in progress right up until the very last day. And we were out there every day struggling through and trying to get it dialed in. But it had its moments, and it definitely kicked out some great shots.
Yeah.
Morissette, Kevin Young, Sean Kearns, these guys were all up there ripping. There's a bunch of other guys, Jamie Lynn, of course, Brushy, Noah Brandon, Salaz, Palmer. There's a few other people that managed to be up there. The Canadians were ruling it. I mean, Morissette, I think that was one of the times when Morissette really sort of started to evolve as a standout, rider on not just a Canadian, but on a professional level.
Absolutely.
He would go huge, that kid. And he was a kid then. I mean, now, now we're all grown up and all that. But back then he was really making an impression, and that was really cool. But all those guys, even Kevin Young was ripping. All those guys were tearing it up.
Yeah, Kevin was coming up at that point.
Yep.
And Sean Johnson, I don't know if Johnson was riding that
Johnson
one.
rode, yep. Yeah. He was up there shoveling too.
He was ahead of the curve.
He was for sure.
For the world.
Yeah.
But as far as Canadians go.
And this was before Boozy the Clown and all that too. This was before that whole thing took off. Those guys were still in their sort of pre-Boozy phase, and they were just ripping.
Competitive.
Just ripping.
Yeah. Totally.
So...
Yeah, that was Whistler was, I mean, you've mentioned Dano. Dano was up there shooting. So how did you pick Whistler for the spot?
We needed a place that would mainly just let us have our own stretch of snow in order to build a pipe. And I think we had thrown some ideas around. After that Super Pipe, we skipped a year, and the next time it became Super Park.
Right.
And so we did Super Park a couple times, and I think we did it at Squaw Valley once. And then another time we did it at Big White with Flynn Seddon was the manager there. And Flynn was such a great guy. He invited us all up, took great care of us, and we built this park. And we got a lot more of a younger contingent up on the hill. I remember some young Canadians came up there, and this is the first time we really had like some really big jumps. Picture a Super Park that happened at Mammoth when they had that huge jump. This was like the very first incantation of what it was going to evolve into. And this is when parks were, you're just starting to see these bigger jumps. You're just starting to see these rodeo 5s and occasional flat spin 7s over the jump and stuff like that. And there was these younger kids that were doing it too.
Totally.
And so that was really cool. And that was when I remember Hail Bop Comet was out. That was the time when that was going. I remember that.
I do.
And I remember going out at night and kind of looking at the park, and you could see the big comet up in the sky. It was beautiful, and it was just that part of the world is awesome. I think Kelowna and Kamloops. It's a beautiful that part of Canada and North America, and just being up there was really cool. And it was a great place to shoot. The sunsets were always gorgeous, and the kids that we had show up were ripping.
I was really excited to find that out about that photo shoot with Sully's Gully.
Yeah.
That was a concept that ended up, I mean, Super Park went on forever.
Yes.
It was like a hallmark of snowboarder, Pat Bridges picking the people, the teams coming down, and again, making or breaking people's careers.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
Like people showing up at Super Park and just, standing on the sidelines waiting for that invite in to hit something.
Yeah, they're all.
Right? Yeah.
I remember Pat used to wear this, it's been in a video, I'm sure you've seen it, but he used to wear this football, what was it? The referee outfit with the black pinstripe, black and white.
Yep.
And he'd have a flag in his back pocket. And so if someone flailed on a jump, he'd be all, and he'd throw the flag into the half pipe. Oh, it was classic the eye.
And is he joking?
He's kind of joking, but he's kind of like calling you out too a little bit, like flag on the play.
Right. Yeah.
If you're out of the pipe, go sit this one out, type of thing. And
he had to make his calls.
Yeah.
Right.
It was just really. I think trying to hold the riders to a certain standard too, which I think is something that we don't see as much these days. Is like this idea that you got to step it up. If you want to compete with the big boys or you want to be out here riding for the mag.
Yeah, right. The Sims team manager, Malcolm, just happened to live on my route from the time that you did your photo shoot up there in the first Super Pipe. And he was juggling people. He was wooing Kevin Young.
Yeah.
And Kevin was up there. He told the story of like, okay, there's this, maybe this wasn't your shoot, but I think it was, of being told like, here, take some Sims boards up and go up there. Like, you're our new guy. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And And then like maybe Al Clark or someone who was like kind of further down the Sims Canada team was sitting there going like, can I get a ticket? Can I ride? Can I ride? And Malcolm was like, sorry, homie. Like, it's a limited deal. We got Salaz, we got Palmer, we got...
And it was pretty limited. We had, in fact, we probably could have fit a couple more guys. Some of the guys would come in and stay for a couple days and then bail. Like Noah Brandon was there the first couple days, and he was ripping. And I remember, early bird gets the worm. I mean, I ended up getting some great shots of him in the first days where the pipe was really tuned up.
Yeah.
And he was up there just blasting. And I always liked Brandon. He was always a really nice guy, and he was always really solid on snowboard. He'd work for the hits and work for the shots. To me, that was always something I kind of looked for from these guys, is like guys who were really willing to put in the extra mile.
So did you invite people personally?
There's a few guys that I told about.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things too, like it's kind of like throwing a party where you invite a bunch of people, but say at your house or whatever, and you don't really know who's going to show up or if they're going to show up, and if they like you and they're stoked or whatever, and they see the opportunity, they might come. But a lot of times, sometimes people just won't come. You're like, oh, so you send out all these invites. Palmer, Brushy, Jamie Lynn, the list goes on. And you're up there digging this pipe, and then all of a sudden, the rumor comes in, Palmer's in town. Like, oh.
How did he get there? Like, would Sims have
probably
flown
sent
him
him up there, or flew him up or something. And he came up and rode like 2 or 3 days. And
so did you talk to team managers and stuff?
I think I had told Palm. I mean, Palm and I had sort of a funky relationship back then because he lived in Lake Tahoe, and I'd always see him around. And, he was kind of a tough guy to deal with sometimes. And so... he would just give you shit about anything, But at the same time, he wasn't a dumbass. I mean, he would recognize the power of promotion. I mean, his fame is undeniable. Oh. And part of the reason that is because despite in addition to him being a solid rider, being one of the most talented people in the world, like the movie says, the miserable champion. He was also savvy in the fact that he knew that in order to make money and to succeed, you do have to get photos in the mag, and you do have to work, and so. He would cut me a little bit of slack at times, and when I gave him an opportunity to shoot up there, of course he's not going to turn it down, but he's not going to make it easy on you either. He's not going to come begging at your door, knocking your door down for a ticket or anything like that.
Right. And
that's the way it is with all those guys. All of a sudden Brushy shows up one day at the pipe, and you're hanging out, and next thing you know, he's ripping the bar and doing these huge airs, and you're clicking and clacking away and, getting it done. And it's
that must have felt pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, some of those guys... Brushy, Palm, Craig Kelly was like this. It's every hit. Every time they hit the jump, there's something.
Right.
Where some of these guys, they got to hit it 10 times to get it right. And it's different, too, now. With still photography versus video, I think we might even hit on this last time. Video, they got to stomp it. Where still shots, even if they get a sick air, if they kind of butt check on the way in, it's not the end of the world. You got a great still shot.
Yeah, people had to come up with their own, can you print a shot of me that was a bail? If I landed it in the session, then
let's see how it looks.
Yeah, we'll take the one that looks the best out of the session.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter to me if it was a make or not. Whereas, guys like Devin, I've heard him say like they don't want to print a picture of themselves.
There are guys who have said that. Don't print that. They don't want to have the reputation of having a bail published or something like that, which I get it, to each their own.
Who was shooting film up there? Was there film of it? I feel
so
like
the Super Pipe, there was FLF was filming a freestyle moment, a freestyle moment with Jamie Lynn.
That's right.
Remember that? I think it was like either Snowboards in Exile or Riders on the Storm, or I think it was Riders on the Storm.
Yes.
I think they had Palmer, Brushy, Jamie Lynn. I don't know if Salaz was there to film with those guys. I do think Salaz was there for a couple days. I don't recall having any shots of him for some reason, but Sliggs was definitely in his heyday right around then, so it would make perfect sense. Either, if he wasn't there, was probably some valid reason.
Yep.
There's a few other guys, but FLF handled the filming, and Snowboarder Mag sponsored the FLF movies back then. So
it was kind of a perfect storm. It's like we're making this cool creative event.
Yeah.
We're inviting the best riders in the world.
Yes.
We're at the resort that wins best resort in the world year after year after year after year.
Yes.
At that time, Whistler was just like the champion.
Especially in the summer.
Yeah, it was crazy, right?
Yeah,
And
you had Craig's camp too, and you had Achenbach's camp.
yeah, totally.
They were both running their pipes in their camp, and they both had small pipes too. That's something that was kind of conspicuous. They were both. If you look back at some of the old photos, Dano's got a bunch of photos from the Camp of Champions and all that, and it's that sort of 9 to 12 foot pipe. 12 was big, back then, and I think for us when we were building that pipe, the big pipe we had definitely stood out. It was conspicuous compared to the small pipes that they had on the other side of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. I'm glad that I asked you about it because I thought maybe it was just like the name. Like you were like, oh, just a super pipe.
We wanted it to be, something really special. And I'll be the first one to admit the pipe never rose to the expectations that we were hoping for.
It was impossible to do. That's a really hard task.
Yeah, especially with big walls and stuff. There's a limit to how high you can push the shovel up and still get the tranny right. And
right.
You're trying to dig steps in the thing and you're salting it and it's slick and you're sliding down. And there's a limit. You're absolutely right. There's a limit to how you can get from the top and kind of shape it, but
that was Greg Todd's was the no-board guy and the first 20-foot super pipe, and it was hand dug in a really deep place. You know what I mean? Like it was just
about an ice field or something like that.
Yeah, on Brome Ridge. It took forever, right?
Yeah.
And it took a lot of people. So it was like they were building on what obviously those guys had seen what you had done.
I would think.
And then they were just like, we're going to go one up to this massive level.
There was a little bit of sourness from a few Canadians, I think, that not the entire Canadian A team was invited to come up and participate.
That makes total sense, of course.
I think maybe
right.
that sort of I don't want to give too much credit, but that might have helped inspire their idea of we're going to do our own pipe, and it's going to be a real super pipe, and
right.
More power to them for taking the initiative to do that. The thing was like I could be totally mistaken about this, but I almost think that there were a few days up there where we weren't even allowing the shovelers to ride.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And that caused a little bit of a dust up too. They're like, we're out here shoveling, and I think we were trying to take care of them and get them lunch and beer and whatever else. But
sure.
I think eventually we did let them ride in there because it was just causing too much of a stir.
Really?
And I didn't want to be labeled a total dick for not letting these guys ride. They're up there shoveling, but we needed the pipe to stay in good condition. We didn't want there to be big bomb holes. We wanted Palm to be able to drop in and hit the line and have it be sick, And you got 20 kind of hungry hippos up there all trying to go 2 feet out on this giant pipe. They're not really suited for it. These younger kids aren't really used to riding these massive transitions where guys are going 12, 15 feet out. It's like, which sounds small by today's standards, but Palm or Brushy going 15 feet out in that pipe was something.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, anything over 10, 12 feet was like definitely upper scale.
And Palm took his foot out. That was like the craziest shit.
That was nuts.
That was great.
He used to do a fair bit of that where he was actually doing backside airs where he had his foot out and he'd kind of do a big kick where he wasn't doing the foot plant like he got on the cover.
Yeah.
I did think that cover was kind of goofy, though. I've always kind of been like, Dano got a great shot. Dano was a master photographer, but
yes.
The whole "I am the king" thing was just kind of, it kind of had that little text on the cover.
I barely remember that, but yeah, sure.
But you know what? I didn't make the magazine, so if it sold a lot of mags, then what can you say?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of personalities when it comes to the publishing of. Especially when the magazines are the king of the content, right? Like
for sure.
In your era, it's like pre-big videos where everybody's watching the videos every year.
Pre-Instagram, pre-Facebook. It's where people were getting their content, for sure.
Yeah.
And the videos to a certain extent, but the videos came out, at the end of each year. Obviously, they were more expensive to order the video. So the magazine I think the first issue came out in like August or July. They were always a little bit early for the season.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And the magazine was over by December, or January was like the last issue or something like that.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. It was such a wild thing, but it was how we got our information about snowboarding.
Absolutely.
Like 100% of our information came out of the magazines.
Yep, for sure. For sure, and Snowboarder, had their ongoing competition with Transworld, and they were both kind of going back and forth. And Snowboarder was a better mag sometimes. Transworld had some great issues. Everybody was competing for the advertising dollars and to try to create the best content.
There was a scarcity mindset, which is totally understandable for the time.
Yeah.
If I look at the first first season of Transworld, it was basically 2 events that they went to.
Yeah.
And so they kind of spread out these photos from these 2 events.
Yep.
But it really did, center those people that happened to be at those events. Like
Achenbach was on the first cover of Transworld, right?
Yep,
I remember I had that magazine, and I was blown away. Even that first photo, that big photo of him on the cover doing that, that sunny Canadian backside air on like a big quarter pipe or something like that.
That's right. And the thing that Kevin Kinnear pointed out was that he chose the photo because there's a skier looking up at Dave.
Huh.
It's Dave on the cover, and the little subtext was, the new, the future is here. Or something
the new
like
beginning
that.
or something.
That's it. Yeah, and it's so when you notice that, you're like, oh, there's another layer to it that I didn't really realize. Kind of like a Bud Fawcett photo. I never knew what it was about a Bud Fawcett photo that was so recognizable. But he was shooting people's faces. That was the thing, was that the look on the face in a Bud Fawcett photo was always a part of the thing. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
He was shooting a portrait of a person. It just happened to be that they were snowboarding.
Bud was one of the early guys who really showed a propensity to shoot specifically snowboarding, and he just really had a gifted eye. He was one of the first snowboarding photography influences that I ever sort of started to sort of admire and try to emulate. I think all photographers try to emulate other photographers at times to a certain degree.
Of course.
But Bud definitely had the look, and he also had the, he was Tahoe. He was really in with the guys who were Chris Roach and the boys, Sione and that whole crew, and he was their favorite guy. And, I remember calling him up and asking him about, for some tips. And I remember he gave me some tips over the phone. And those were things the things that he told me that day on the phone were things that I applied for the next 20 years.
I love it.
Yeah, he just really had it figured out, as far as shooting snowboarding. And so his photos were always great. And even today, I mean, he's pretty prolific on Instagram and stuff like that.
Yeah, he got a scanner, and he just took it on himself to scan everything.
Yeah. I've been trying to, I've sent him a couple messages, Bud, if you're out there, he's got to make a book. He's got so many photos. His photos deserve to be sort of captured in a more of a permanent, something for the public to see.
I agree.
He's got so much portraiture of the guys, which is something that it took me a few years to kind of pick up on, getting the B-roll and the sideline stuff and the lifestyle and the personality. Yeah, the in-between stuff is critical. And that's something that I would tell any photographer out there that's listening to this, is don't hesitate to shoot the faces when they're walking up the pipe, when they're sitting in the car, when they're in their skivvies or whatever after a long day. It's like, this is where you really get the personality. You get the big raccoon eyes and I'm beat to hell. And it's like, there's a really famous shot of that Chris Brunkhart, rest in peace, Chris, took of Craig taking his boot off. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It was from Island Lake Lodge. Everybody's has seen this photo. Yes. And there's this big cloud of sweat fog coming off his boot. And it's just such a powerful image of just like a hard day on the hill. It's Craig.
Yeah.
Craig is, you can tell he's been riding, out there just ripping bottomless powder.
Totally.
And stuff like that. It's just there's a lot of power in those photos. And that photo is a timeless icon of snowboarding photography from back in the day now.
Right.
But back then it was just a snapshot. Oh, let me get a shot of that,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and Bud never got a cover.
Is that true?
He never got a Transworld or Snowboarder cover, no.
Man, I can't believe that.
I can't believe it either. It just doesn't make sense.
No, I wonder why. Maybe his photos just weren't geared for I mean, there's no doubt that it's kind of like if you're a famous actor who's been in great movies, but you've never gotten the Oscar. I've made 100 movies that are huge, but you've never won the big award. It's like, it doesn't mean you're a lesser actor or that your work isn't prolific or awesome.
There's only so few covers. That's the thing. When you actually look at all of Transworld, all of Snowboarder, you're talking about a couple hundred, less than 200 issues probably. So,
I feel bad now because I think I had like 16 covers over the course of my time at Snowboarder.
That's nuts.
I'm not trying to say it as a boast.
No, exactly.
I was always really stoked to get the covers, though. I mean, the covers is like, it's reaffirming when it comes to your work, that you ended up on the first page. But Bud's imagery, though, was always great. I mean, he was a master photographer and still is.
I can think of 30 shots of his.
Absolutely.
just off the top of my head where they're so bud, like they're so bud.
Wow.
Yeah. So when he told me he hadn't gotten a cover, I was like, "That I don't believe you."
Yeah.
That was my first
is
thing,
that true? We're gonna have to go back and like find the poster of Transworld that has all the covers on it.
Yeah.
Because I can remember a couple particular shots of Bud. I remember he did this photo shoot with the Burton team at Squaw Valley, and they were hitting this jump that's up by Broken Arrow, and it's got this sandstone wall behind him.
Sick.
I'm sure you've seen the shots. There's one where Craig's doing this.
Yep.
I
think there's a Terrier one.
Yeah, there's a Terrier. There's a couple brushy shots.
Yes.
I even think he might have taken Chris Roach over there at some point on a different day. But this hit was a hit that was like, it was Bud's hit. And you know what's funny about that is I remember seeing those shots and trying to go search out that hit. I was like, man, where is that? That is one of the coolest spots. And then when I found it, I was like, you know what? I remember consciously going, you know what? He's gotten so many shots published on this. I'm gonna back off.
That's amazing.
You know, it's not really my place. I don't want him showing up at the cliff that I've shot 5 years in a row.
Right.
You know what I mean? And kind of emulating the shots
and taking the shot. Right.
Yeah.
Because there's a very famous shot, the City Booter in Vancouver, where it's you build it. It's a nice transition. It's got a pretty good landing. Great landing for like someone of my caliber.
Sure.
You know, to 90s Devin Walsh,
but it's got the city behind it,
it's
right?
It's such an iconic
up
shot.
At like Seymour or something like that.
It's at Seymour, and it's very hard not to get a great shot.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I did shoot an event at Seymour once.
Oh, cool.
And that photo, that image, that angle had been run several times.
Yeah.
And I remember going up and seeing that jump, and I remember I shot a couple guys hitting it. It might even have been like a Devin Walsh or like a Kevin Young or something. I was up there shooting something. I liked that area. I liked Seymour. I like those hills that are right above the city right there. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Especially in the evenings when the city's kind of lighting up and stuff like that.
It's so great. Yeah.
But I don't think those photos ever ran anywhere because of that same reason. I think I was late to the game as far as, you know, running a photo, especially if your name's a little bigger than like sort of the local Canadian kid who got lucky and got the photo published in the mag, and then you go up there and shoot his same angle, kind of poach it in a way, and then your photo ends up everywhere. It's almost a little bit of a bite, I think. You know,
you have so much more integrity than I don't think people practice that same integrity now.
That's too bad. That's too bad. You know, because there's plenty of hits up there. There's plenty of jumps. There's plenty of angles.
Right.
If you just use your creativity, try to create something new. You know, this comes back to what you were saying about Bud shooting people's faces. I mean, if you follow the basic principles, using the law of thirds, if you follow the basic principles in photography, get the sun on their face, get the view to their back, get the front of them, you know, don't get the butt shot. You know, there's some really basic ideas that if you stick to it, you can get great shots without too much, you know, you don't need to copy other people.
Right.
You know?
Well, but now we've got such a sheer volume of media that there really aren't those, like, you know, we still have photographers, snowboard photographers, for sure.
The one guy who you might have seen on Instagram recently, he held up his sobriety chip. He had a photo just a couple days ago.
You know, and I'm not 100% sure.
He was with Snowboarder, and he's done some stuff with Torment magazine, that guy in Colorado or whatever.
Is that where Torment is from?
Yeah, from Boulder.
Yeah, I can tell it's not from somewhere.
Yeah.
That I know, but I didn't know they were from.
As far as I know, yeah, the guy. God, I can't remember what his name is right now, but those guys. And that's an interesting magazine. Actually, I don't think they run any ads. It's a really thick book. They just do it on. They make money on the cover price of the book, which is a pretty interesting model for print these days.
Yeah. So Andy Wright is a guy that comes to mind when I'm thinking of.
Sure.
But there's so many of them, right? Like there's you know, there's only really King Snow and Snowboard Canada up in Canada are still running mags. Slush.
Yep.
And then Torment, I guess.
Yeah, Torment's kind of regional. I mean, they run content from all over, but
yeah.
Yeah, those
Snowboarder Journal,
print magazines. Yeah,
Frequency.
Yeah,
right.
Galbraith. Galbraith's done a good job of keeping the vibe alive, keeping the energy, the fire going. You know,
it's a subscription based thing, right? With like really nice.
And I think
photos.
He sells some ads, but it's an expensive cover price. You know, I think he does $15-$16 if I'm not mistaken. I haven't seen it for a while, but it's that really nice paper and the harder cover and stuff.
Like we were paying $5, $8.95 Canadian or something like that back in the day.
For like a snowboarder or something.
Yeah,
like that,
man. Yeah, like in the heyday.
Yeah.
They weren't cheap.
No.
But they weren't making any money off sales of the things.
Yeah.
It was all advertising.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when Snowboarder and Transworld were making a lot of money, though. I mean, like ridiculous hand over fist cash.
Yeah.
You know, especially like their buyer's guide edition, and it would be like 390 pages or something crazy like that. It looked like a Vogue magazine, you know, with the board guide in there.
Yeah, and getting a cover would change a rider's life. If you got a cover and you were like a A-team rider for a smaller company, the offers are coming out of the woodwork.
Absolutely. The cover shot was a coveted spot, more so for the rider than the photographer.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you're a rider and you're trying to like make a name for yourself, you know, like an example is the Morissette cover where he's busting through the trees in black and white.
So sick.
You know, that became a pretty iconic moment. But that photo today still carries so much weight. And
I agree.
I have people requesting the prints for me of that shot. But I think it did even more for Morissette. I think it really, you know, Morissette came to kind of define an era of snowboarding with that single moment. Busting through the trees, he's not grabbing his board. It's power, it's powder, it's charging, you know? And it's like you said, there's just a certain thing about some photos just have something about them.
A little extra magic.
Yeah.
Anything creative can have that, right? Like
Absolutely.
Music, sometimes...
Yeah.
You're noodling around and you're recording some music, and there's just a moment.
Yeah. Whoa, that sounded kind of cool. You
Yeah.
know? So, yeah, same with photos. Like, you know, you shoot something multiple times, and then one time the sun just popped out behind a cloud, or a tree sat in a certain way, or you moved over a little bit, and everything kind of syncs up together. And, not all photos end up that way. You know, you can shoot all day. And
when you look at
one of those.
early mags, none of the photos in there were any of those. None of those.
No, you can look at early mags. A lot of the photos are garbage. I mean, that was
so bad.
Yeah. You know, earlier, it's funny because we were talking about, you were asking me about Bud Fawcett, and I want to make a comment about that, about what you're saying, too, because some of the early guys, Guy Motil.
Yep.
What was that guy's name? Rod something. He was the Burton photographer.
Rod Walker.
Yeah. Rod Walker wasn't really, and I never had the privilege to meet Rod Walker, but he was a well-known, if I recall correctly, he worked for a stock agency, you know, and Burton hired him to come in and shoot snowboarding. And if you look at a lot of the photos that they used back then, they were big. They ran this whole campaign, multi-year campaign with him that was all these guys, kind of guy in the sky.
Yep.
You know, type of thing. And it was like, there's a few shots out there. I remember there's a shot from Baker where they're jumping over like a snowplow, a piston bully. And
that's a Rod Walker shot.
If I'm not mistaken.
Tuck knee with Jason Ford.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But most of his shots, like the brushy, you know, kind of styling in the air.
Yeah, he's just in the air. There's no frame of reference. There's snow flying around. You don't know.
And I was always like, that's freaking stupid. And I came from a skateboarding point of view.
Right.
And so my angle was always like, you got to have the lip in the photo. Guy in the sky just does not fly. Was sort of my motto back then. And so I was always like, I was always a little bit offended by the fact that they were making such a big deal. And I didn't like the fact that, and, you know, I'm sure Rod's a nice guy. This isn't meant to be a personal, you know, blast on him at all.
Of course.
I just felt like, coming from a skateboarding point of view, and I came up around snowboarders who were trying to emulate skateboarding, which I still see a lot today. Mm-hmm. That idea, or that ideal of guy in the sky and not including the lip was just the antithesis of what I was going for as a photographer.
Well, they were a big company, so they were also using like ad agency guys to write the ad.
Absolutely.
They were using like general, you know, like, I don't want to say high profile, but like well received, like graphic designers to make their graphics. And everybody was doing that. Like Jason Ford, when he joined Ride, he was like, some ad agency made the spark plug graphic. It was like a slightly out of focus, weird vectorized spark plug. And he just spray painted it black.
Yeah.
And they were going to go with his pro model was going to have something from that ad agency, because the money guys like Jamie Salter are going, hey, we're paying the ad agencies who know what the fuck they're doing here.
Yeah.
They know what people like. And Jason Ford's like, that's fine with me. But whatever shit graphic you put on there, I'm just going to spray paint it all black.
Yeah.
And then they were like, wait a minute. What if we listened to what if we made the board that he wanted? Like, and then he was like, well, if I could have it any color, like, let's do cherry red with a deep, you know, like a car paint with a fleck in there.
Yeah.
You know? And so I totally hear what you're saying. There was a point where people were trying to be as professional as possible and use, ad agencies and
Yes.
and like National Geographic photographers.
And you know what, Burton? One thing you have to say though is Burton sold a shit ton of snowboards those years.
Yeah.
So you really can't slide it. Even though I was sitting here
No.
going, "This looks stupid."
But
I mean, naturally,
yeah.
I'm 20, 21 years old. Of course, I'm going to be hating on whatever out there that
Totally.
because that's the way we are when we're that age. But yeah, I was kind of against it. But at the same time, I'm sure they sold 100,000 snowboards that year and made back their money. And I mean, that was a huge year for Burton. Huge period.
Of course.
So you really can't slide it that much. It just wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah, well, but then we also wanted snowboarding to do the transition it did during your era into boards that were shaped the way that we wanted them.
For sure.
Riders that were wearing the kind of gear that we wanted. Like when you think about, you're mentioning Johnson and Kearns there, that era of Kearns, he's in like floral print Quicksilver shit.
Yeah.
Like that guy is in floral print Quicksilver shit. That's fucked up, right? He should be in, a leather jacket.
For sure.
And some, like black bib pants or something, Like it just didn't exist. And every year was so exciting because the thing you wanted sometimes would be some random company would make, like a fireman's jacket. You're like, all right, that's what I want with the clips.
Yep.
Who
Who was it that made that? Was it Morrow or some company like that?
The big fireman jacket was some small
I remember
company.
that.
Yeah.
A Bonfire.
Yeah, it might have been a Bonfire thing when they were just first coming up. But yeah, when you think of, was Bonfire Brad Stewart before?
I think it was.
Yeah, so like these were the people that were taking it out of the hands of the weird designers and saying, let's just ask the team riders.
Yeah.
Because that's a better idea.
Which was a smart call.
Yeah.
Back then.
It just made more sense.
Yeah.
And so like, you're coming in, taking photos. Yeah, not to bag on the old magazines, but the standard wasn't there.
The skateboarding. There was an internal struggle early on between skateboarding and skiing, and that's something that I don't think people have talked about too much. But when the first Transworld came out, and before the first issue of Snowboarder came out, when I first started going into it, skiing, the skiing mentality was dominating snowboarding. Racing was big. Burton was making like those ASIM boards.
Yeah.
All the pipe guys were being forced to ride the GS and the gates. And if you go back, even Bud has got a great library of photos of like brushy. There's a shot of him doing the air off the hump next to the gate. And there's shots of Palmer in his tights, and those guys would never do that today. I don't even think they do GS anymore. Skateboarding won.
Yeah.
Ultimately the half pipe and the hitting the jump, skateboarding won. But for a while there, and I think Burton to a certain extent sided with the wrong side of history, and I think that's what led to them using those ad agencies and stuff like that. Is they were coming from like the same place where some of these big ski companies.
That's where
they were using their model to make a snowboard company.
So this totally explains it for me. The last few weeks I've been thinking about like where would skateboarding be if there was already a complete roller skating industry that had parks and contests that were already running.
And we're 10 times bigger.
10 times bigger, right.
Or more.
And 100 years established.
Yes.
So imagine skateboarding came up and the only way to get a skateboard made was to get it made through a roller skating company.
Yes.
So roller skating had the thumb on skateboarding. Skateboarding wouldn't be the same. We'd probably still be on banana boards.
For sure.
Because we'd be on the narrow trucks.
Yeah.
Like skateboarding broke away early and was cheap enough to manufacture with a piece of wood.
Yeah, and the cost of entry is much lower.
Yeah, and you could just do it anywhere, right?
Yeah.
You could skate in a parking lot. Skateboarding became its own autonomous thing.
It did.
Because the owners of the big 5 skateboard companies are skaters, were skaters. Snowboarding had Jake going to ski companies and having them, go like, here's how you do it, guy.
Yeah.
Like, get in the racing, get with the FIS. You know what I mean? Like, they've already got,
It's true.
And so he was on the wrong side of history, but he was right.
He was right for the time.
Do it. Yeah. And it's what ended up happening anyways.
It did. And a lot of the ski companies were the earliest companies manufacturing the snowboards, too. I mean, they were before we really had the presses. The ski presses were
still now. There was never a time where snowboarders built the factory themselves.
Yes.
That, you know what I mean, from scratch. that became the thing. There were guys who did it, like Ernie DeLost and a couple of smaller manufacturers that did big runs of things, but ultimately they got bought by some company that was bought by some company that had roots to Europe.
Yep.
And bigger manufacturing.
Yes.
And the boards just went from niche, made in America thing to overseas somewhere. Whether it's
K2 is a prime example of that. Like K2 became a pretty big brand, but they were at the heart of K2 has always been their ski brand.
Right.
And I remember going over to when I worked with those guys for a few years. I went over to Vashon Island when they had their factory over there, and it was a ski factory.
Right.
So you'd walk in and they have these cool boards and stuff, and they had that. I remember they had that really classic Dano board that was white.
Yes.
With the K2 logo on it.
Yes, the XTC.
Yeah, that was a great board.
Beautiful board.
But I remember riding that thing. I remember one year at Baker, and it had those really janky drill holes in it. And I ripped the binding out on the first run. The first run of the day, halfway down the hill. At Mount Baker sucks. I had to walk down. I was so pissed. I was like, and after that, obviously you figure out you got to start mounting those things with T-bolts. But it sucked, I was like, come on, guys. I mean, you got to make a better snowboard.
Right, and K2 did a very good job of not alienating the snowboarders from their...
No,
like
they did. They were good.
They weren't like skiers going,
screw these guys.
Fuck these guys. And they were in early. They were in very early.
Yes.
Rossi was very similar, but I think somewhere along the way, not just somewhere, all the way along the way, there were people that were kind of like, these snowboarder guys are nuisances.
Yes.
Like
there's always that underlying sort of energy.
Yeah. It's a bummer we have to make these, but
there's money.
Yeah, it's money. So then that's what ends up happening is that the whole thing was basically dominated by people at the top who wanted to make money.
For sure.
And for a while in there, while you were shooting photos, there were people that were snowboarding that were top pros that were also redesigning snowboard gear from year to year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was epic. Sure. Yeah.
I remember I did a photo shoot for Rosignol one year, and I remember having some apprehension because they were a ski brand, and I was kind of anti a little bit. I was like, screw these guys,
Yeah.
But when they come and knock in and they're offering you, full day rate. I mean, big ski companies have money, know, and we were trying to make a living. You're like, okay, well, all right, I'm not going to turn that down, and then you end up meeting their team. I remember, I'm pretty sure it was a Rosignol shot. We had like Mina Hesso and Posse Voho. They were ripping. They had a decent team. Obviously, a ski company that's putting together a snowboard team is going to have the money to fund the A team.
Was it pre or post Sione? Because Sione had it.
He was on Rossi for a while.
Yeah.
I think it might have been pre-Sione.
Okay.
Yeah, if I recall correctly. I remember we did a shoot up at Sonora Pass. Sione wasn't there. I don't have any shots of Dave there.
That was when Rossi turned to corner coolness-wise. It's exactly what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
It's that Dave comes over. He does a coffee-inspired, he likes coffee, so he did a coffee freestyle board graphic. Yep. And he put like Jamie Lynn and Palmer and everybody, like just photos of all the most iconic snowboarders.
Yep.
And it was like he wrote on there, all my friends or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a really great board.
Yeah, it's a cool
compared
concept
to what
too.
they were doing with, whatever ad agencies or graphic designers they had with the funny lines and the racing stripes and the different colors that were trending that season or whatever,
it's funny. I recently... there was a little conversation that broke out online where I think Joel Gomez, vintage 45 RPM, had put up a post about one of the early snowboard movies, and I went on there and I mentioned the Western Front, which is like they filmed FLF filmed the Western Front before Snowboarders in Exile.
Yep.
It was filmed the spring before, and if I recall correctly, those guys filmed it in like 2 weeks at Squad, just going up there.
It
every
makes
day.
sense.
Yeah, and it's right
because
spring.
they Squad allowed snowboarding
for the first time
in the spring.
That's correct.
And so, from what I understand, Jerry and Artie were those guys that were on the hill, take a photo of you, and at the end of the day, when you go down by the base, they would print these prints for the mountain.
They had a day job of doing the on the hill photos.
And so they knew where the spots were.
Yeah, those guys made Western Front and Squaw. That was the first time that the Squaw had been closed to snowboarding up to that point, and I think they'd been getting a lot of pressure because Tahoe was such an epicenter.
Yeah.
Once again, they saw the potential for money.
There was skiing in that movie too. Actually, there was a couple.
Yeah, there was a couple skiers. But Squaw was almost even more legendary back then. I mean, all the classic lines, and the skiers had been ripping those lines for years. Eagle's Nest and KT22 and all these big, you know. And the fact that they opened up that year was a big deal for snowboarders, and snowboarders went on to, you know, tackle a lot of those big extreme lines, the Palisades, and you know, the shots of Damien jumping. Oh yeah,
yeah. It's Noah on a Kemper.
Oh yeah,
he's on like a Kemper freestyle.
He's got those huge gloves on.
Yeah, with the gate basher gloves.
That's right. He's I'm gonna shred some powder, and then I'm gonna do the run through the GS course on my way down.
But you could see in that early Fall Line film the kind of blueprint for what was to come. Like these guys were actually like conscious that they were being filmed. They were worried about their style. They were like grabbing their boards or poking it out. Like it was like I remember seeing Western Front. I watched it over and over.
And some of it's pretty goofy. I mean, I watched it just a couple weeks ago, and you look at it, you're like, oh, that Tindy is just terrible. You know, you're like, come on, guys. You know, but you know who really stood out though is Chris Roach. Chris Roach is one of the few guys that I can honestly say had the right idea from day one. Yeah. You know, even his earliest footage, he's grabbing in the right spot. He's putting the style on it. He doesn't look all goofy up there.
Yeah, his arms are in the right place.
Yeah, his arms are in the right place.
I just saw a clip of him and Ryder, his son. Yeah. That's current.
I saw that where they're kind of riding powder behind each other.
And it's still the same rad style.
You can see Chris kind of ripping, and there's Chris. You can just tell. And, you know, everybody was kind of doing their own thing. And the whole reason I brought up Western Front was because, you know, Sione was such a prominent force back then. And him and Grammy they're decked out in full look Lamar regalia with the yellow pants and the look board. And it was all kind of goofy, but those guys were ripping. I mean, those guys, you know, Sione and Grammy, they've set the stage for such a turning point in the sport that really pull the snowboarding away from the skiing, you know. And I think that movie was seminal in that regard, that it was one of the first movies where they tried to get it away from, start building snowboarding's original identity.
Yeah, I agree. You look at that era, you've got the standard film guys partner up and make Totally Bored. Yeah. Which is close, but it's still in that ski film genre of like kind of a travel film. Yes. I mean, it's wild. It's got animation or like claymation, and it's got, you know, some pretty epic shit. And they go to Alaska. Like the
Alaska thing was definitely pretty wild. I was roommates with those guys, Dave Hatchett, that year. I think Mike lived down the street. They might have both lived there at one point. But we had this house, and they were filming a movie. And that was the first year I met those guys. The winter of '89 was the year I moved to Tahoe. I ran into those guys up on Mount Rose. It was him and Aaron Astorga, AA, who has gone on to be an amazing all-around snowboarder, skateboarder, surfer. You know, he won the that event they had a few years ago, the King of the Mountain or King of the Hill. It wasn't the Alaska King of the Hill. It was King of the Boards or something like that. He won all three events. IJ Valenzuela was up there, who IJ went on to do great things. He passed away maybe 2 years ago. Rest in peace, IJ. But that first winter, I met these guys all hiking up at Mount Rose, and I ended up moving with Mike and Dave, and they're like, "We're making a movie," you know, and they ended up making the movie that year, and it turned out pretty good.
Turned out epic.
I think for the time, it was great.
Yes.
But Nick Parada was a big part of that production.
Farmer and Parada.
Yeah, Farmer and Parada were and Farm definitely came in the next year. You know, when they started filming Snowboarders in Exile, then Riders on the Storm. Yes. You know, Mike had made that movie, Totally Bored 1, and then the next year he did a year working for FLF, I think was the deal, if I recall correctly. Right. And then the next year...
Which would have been not Western Front, it would have been Snowboarders in Exile.
I think it was Riders on the Storm. Maybe.
Oh, so it was after... Right, so those are kind of side by side.
Snowboarders in Exile and TB1 came out at the same year, I think. And then the next year, there was just one movie, Riders on the Storm. Yep. The following year, Totally Bored 2 came out. And that was Mike's deal. And that was the real game changer. That was the movie that completely, just blew the whole thing wide open with the
TB2. Yeah. A new way of thinking. Is that what it even is?
That's what it was.
It's nuts. Yeah. It's nuts. Watching it it gives me chills when I watch it. I love that.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember the way that whole thing unfolded. Like Mike Hatchett was slated to do another season for FLF. And he didn't want to do it. He was kind of like wanted to make his own movie. They had made Totally Bored 1.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of headbutting. You know, Mike's always been an alpha male, A-type.
Totally.
You know, a leader. And he's always been a great leader when it comes to that. And he I think didn't like being in the second on deck circle.
Of course,
you know,
dude.
he was a great filmer, and he was had the creative vision for the whole thing. And I remember him. We had a house phone with that big long bouncy cable, and I remember him calling up, you know, FLF and kind of giving the whole thing the kibosh. And
Wow.
you know, and they came up with standard films. But I mean, it was a big turning point, I think, for Mike too, because he turned down a full season of paying gigs in order to start his own thing with his brother Dave.
That's tough.
You know, and he had to make the call, and you know what, it worked out. And you know what else is interesting is there was a bit of a power struggle too, because you had Noah, Roach, Damien, you had all these big time players that were loyal to FLF.
Yep.
You know, and then you had Mike trying to do his thing, and he was able to pull some of those guys over. Not all of them. I don't think Damien filmed with him very much that year. For if I recall correctly, in Totally Bored 2, there's not a lot of Damien.
Almost none.
Almost none, if any.
Maybe none.
Yeah, maybe none. He was an FLF guy that year, and I think there's maybe a little bit of Roach, but it was more like Noah, Double A, Jamie Lynn. Jamie Lynn wasn't loyal to either group. I think he had shots in both movies.
Yep.
You know, Jamie's always been an equal opportunity, you know, ripper.
Has he always been that low key guy that he is? Just like,
as far as I know, yes. We did a trip with Craig Kelly and him to North Cascades Heli, I remember, in the mid '90s, which was kind of a dream team type of thing. And this was quite a few years before Craig passed away. And getting those two guys up on the hill with the helicopter was, you know, surreal experience. And those two guys, they'd kind of complement each other too. You know, Craig had that really soul style. He could still bust up fat method air, but Jamie's up there hucking big spins and stuff. And so getting those guys kind of working together.
Cowboy stance.
Yeah.
Versus that, like.
Yeah, that big sort of.
Yeah, Craig, like knees together.
Yeah.
It's kind of the opposite, actually. Like knees together versus like a squat, square, twin stance.
It's interesting because those two are kind of, in a way, they encapsulate two different sides of snowboarding culture, really, those styles.
Yeah.
The drop knee Burton style, and once again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how skiing was played such a big influence as Burton. You know, they were all being trained by that guy, Jerry, I forget his name, was it Jerry?
Yeah.
The Cross M guy.
Yeah, Cross M.
Yeah, and the
Master
whole
Pool.
team was, I think they were forced to like train with Cross M in the first part of the
Totally.
season.
Yeah.
And those guys had asked me to come up. The Cross M guys had me come up and shoot a couple times with them, and it was gate bashing, and they were trying to and they taught them that very specific style, and you could see it. Like Noah Brandon rode for those guys during that period. He had that kind of drop knee style. Craig Kelly, you could really see it. Duck Boy had it kind of brushy to a lesser extent, but all those guys sort of adopted that style. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you had these guys from the Northwest, Bass, Jamie Lynn, some of the other guys, some of the lesser-known locals, Temple Cummins, Matt Cummins, that had that more wider spread-out style. No skiing, no skis to be seen anywhere close.
Right.
And it was very distinct. There was a very distinct difference between how those two styles looked on the hill.
Well, Blaze Rosenthal pointed out that early Jamie Lynn methods, the ones that you shot, he was posy. So he hadn't turned his foot duck yet.
Yeah.
So he was still posy, which puts your body in a completely different position for a method.
Yes.
Than, like, Blaze will argue that Jamie's method was not as good after he switched to duck foot.
Interesting.
But then you could also do switch methods.
Yeah.
So, like, there is a compensation. Some of the best method shots are, you know, like a Terrier, Nico, like guys that have posy still.
Yeah. I think it up there, they frickin'.
It just kicks
stick
out
it out.
different. It's your
It's two different. It's two different kinds of airs. You know, I think I anytime I post that one photo, Jamie, or a shot of a method goes online, you know, without a hitch, there's always a little argument or dust up that breaks out about this is a proper method, that's a proper method. He's grounding in front of his foot, behind his foot. That's more of a method boned air. That's more of a grasser air. And it's like, you know what?
Right.
I think those conversations are kind of fun. At least it keeps everybody engaged and having. But some people get kind of hot about it. You're like, dude, come on, it's really not that big a deal.
I
it's
had
like
someone ask me at the Wired PK for Boardroom, and Devin Walsh was there. And I said, I default to whatever Devin says.
Yeah.
And Devin's like, yeah, it's from skateboarding. There is no in front of the foot in
Yeah.
skateboarding. Your foot's at the top of the board.
Yeah.
So it's got to be between the bindings.
Yeah.
Because of skateboarding. And I agreed with him and I defaulted to that for about 15 minutes. Then I went home and was like, wait, in front of the binding is a different style. That's snowboard style.
Yeah.
That's not 100% skate influence. That's
true.
It's actually just its own thing that snowboarding came up with.
Let's take a look. So we have here the Jamie Lynn T-shirt that 45 RPM Vintage did.
Oh, it's so good.
Recently. And so
that's
Jamie's
so good.
almost grabbing the binding. He's slightly ahead of the foot.
He
there.
really is on the binding, isn't he?
Yeah, he's kind of on the binding, I would think. But I think one of the beautiful things about it is the way he's got his hand crossing all the way over like that.
Yep. Yeah, the hand down thing is really more important.
Yeah.
I was showed by
great job, Joel Gomez.
Yeah,
put these
gorgeous.
shirts together.
They
He did a
look
great
great.
job on these. I'm really happy how it
I think
turned
I've got one on order.
I really appreciate Joel putting those out. It was pretty neat.
Joel had he played a really important role in early snowboarding, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So-
his Sessions was his brand. And
you mentioned Palmer, so now and you mentioned Palmer's sensibility and like he knew to come to your event.
Yes.
So Palmer early on wanted to go to the bank slalom, and I think he'd done so well at the first one that at the second one, Tom was like, sorry, kid, no budget. And so he went to Joel, and Joel gave him like a blank base board that didn't say Sims on it.
Okay.
And said, yeah, go ride that up at the bank slalom, and I'll give you money for a bus ticket.
Didn't he win it one year?
He went up and he won it.
Yeah.
And then Tom had to apologize to him and
Yeah.
say, sorry, kid, I knew I should have brought you in. I'll never do that again.
Palm was one of those guys that you just couldn't doubt him. He still is. I mean, he's from what I gather, he's always been good at everything he does, whether it's mountain biking, whether it's snowmobiling, whether it's riding the motorcycle, whether it's on the snowboard. It's like everything he does, he just has a real natural gift for athleticism.
Even.
Skiing.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I've known some great people that could snowboard pretty good or could, do things on a board, but I've never seen anybody who is quite as adept at the Bo Jackson. What do they call it? The Bo Jackson effect, where they're just anything they do,
Yeah, he was nuts on like mountain bikes. He goes to mountain bikes, and now
he was winning mountain bike events, like dominating over other people.
It's nuts, but it's interesting his attitude that comes through on videos. Like there's a clip, I can't remember what movie it's in, but I've seen it a few times the last month, where he's like talking about drinking the night before Jack Daniels. I'm hungover as shit. I've already had 7 beers. And I'm going to fucking win it.
Yeah.
But the way that he says, and I'm going to fucking win it.
Yeah.
No one ever wins without that kind of belief in their soul, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to fucking win it.
I heard a really funny story recently because, Jimmy Scott, he put up a post not too long ago that was like talking about how, someone had mentioned something about so-and-so won this event or so-and-so, and he put up a comment below that, and it said, that year I won the series, or I won that event, or something like that. And he straight up put something like, I never get any recognition. I never get noticed.
No, Jimmy, no.
And I mean, I put up this gif of just the eye roll. Like, dude, come on. I mean, it's 20, 30 years later. Really? We're still there with that?
Yeah.
And you can almost tell by reading that. You can just read right through it that he was still bothered by this. For whatever reason.
Right.
And so just recently, someone told me a really funny story about how during that event where Jimmy Scott won the thing, Palmer came in second or something like that, or fourth or something like that. And
Sure.
I don't know exactly how it unfolded. I was told the story third person, but that night at the bar or whatever, Palmer started ripping into Jimmy, going, "You didn't freaking win that. You're a freaking loser. You're like, your freaking airs are 2 feet out," and just laying into him, was relentless. Just would not. You didn't deserve to win that. Telling him that he didn't deserve to be the winner. I should have won or whatever. I don't know if he said I should have won. He just didn't think Jimmy had sort of earned the right to claim the win. But one thing that Jimmy had going for him back then that a lot of the other riders didn't understand, and I think he got this from his roller skating, was that He was the master of milking 20 hits out of a pipe.
Right.
Whereas Palm would do like 6 tricks. Jimmy would do like 15 or 18 tricks.
Palm would do 3.
Yeah.
And
a
Jimmy
method,
would do
a 540, where Jimmy would do a frontside invert, a freaking 540. He'd go up and do a method there.
Across and across and across
and
and across.
all those hits, getting 15 tricks gave you a higher score.
Totally.
That's really how it worked back
He was
then.
a competitor, right?
He was a hardcore competitor. So in one sense, you have to give him credit. Yeah, he worked pretty hard, and he definitely had the tricks. Some of the stuff was only a couple feet out, but at the same time,
or no feet out.
or he used a technique to win the contest that sort of, in a way, sort of played to the judges.
So also, Palmer mentioned, I think on the show years and years ago, that he would also rib you in the gate. Hey, Palmer, you're gonna fall. Like, so he's milking the pipe.
Yeah.
He's doing his thing, but he's also using like
Head games
from like the 60s. You know what I mean? Like 60 competitive stuff. Like, you're gonna fall for sure. Like, jinx.
Yeah.
You know, like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah.
What even
Why are you
is
even
that?
bother taking your run? You're just gonna go down midway through. You know, you're like trying to get into their head. And
right when they're
fuss with them a
dropping
little
in,
bit.
right?
Yeah,
like yelling, like,
What a
imagine that. Like,
God,
what
Jimmy, come on, man. I mean, that's such bad sportsmanship. I mean,
you know what? I
Hate to
got
say
a
it, but-
chance to ride with him, and he is a sweet person.
Jimmy.
And
I
he's
know
got
Jimmy
great
pretty well.
style.
Yeah.
He really does have good style. He
does.
is a pro snowboarder for sure.
Yeah.
He just was lacking that one piece.
Yeah.
Of like, you don't need to be combative with anybody else.
No.
If
Compete against yourself.
compete against yourself, that's it. Yeah, and that's how snowboarding. I don't know. Actually, I was just about to say that's how snowboarding is now. I have no idea. I can't even imagine what it's like to be in a competition in snowboarding right now.
Yeah, today the stakes are so high.
So
these
high.
days, going so big in those huge icy pipes and stuff like that, or hitting the giant kicker.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. You know, I imagine it's a lot more competitive. You don't have quite the outlaws that we had back then.
No.
You know, there's no outlaws. There's no Palmer. There's no Farmer.
There's this one kid with this personality, the Fridge, he's called, and he's got a backpack. Nobody knows what's in it. He showed me what was in it on the chairlift one time. Actually, it's fucking cool. He's a personality.
Yeah.
He got hurt this year in competition, and
sucks.
He's just like posting about it and being like, "I'll be back," and he's a character. He reminds
That's
me
cool,
of those
snowboarding
days.
kind of needs that. They need some characters in there.
I agree.
because
I agree.
It's pretty bland. It's pretty.
But the thing is, it's just not. There's no lack mentality anymore.
I think a lot of the corporate influences that come in and start putting in money, like the X Games, has kind of changed the nature of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
These big sponsors like Monster Energy drink and stuff, they're putting up so much money, but you know they're demanding. I'm sure their contracts have a moral clause in there that you can't.
Probably.
You can't misrepresent the brand. You can't
be
go
a
out there
dick.
destroying hotel rooms. You can't be
Sure.
making. You know, these days a lot of people are getting canceled. You know, you've got the Terrier thing and all these other people that are kind of getting sort of hosed by the industry.
That was wild.
Yeah, that whole thing was unfortunate. I think at the end of the day, you know, really, at the end of the day, the one thing you have to say about Terrier, no matter what, is he was, in my opinion, the best snowboarder.
Yeah, none of that changes. He also said this awful thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing.
But
he did this.
No one had the
yeah.
natural level of skill that he has during his heyday and his time in the sun, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's not a single rider out there before or since, in my opinion, even Sean White, any of those guys going by, who had that gift that Terrier had. For some reason, Terrier just had something.
It didn't come from coaching and going off like what happened for Sean. It seems like the story I tell myself is he got great coaches. He went off into a bubble. He trained on the best facilities.
Yes.
He did the best training that he could possibly do. He put his head in the game, and he became this thing. Terrier was still 100% in the snowboard community. He's out there partying. He's going and doing big lines in Alaska.
Huge lines.
He's winning
crazy shit.
Yeah, he's winning contests here,
Yes.
big airs. He and the bank slalom, nobody can catch him.
He was a dominating rider during his. Even today, you still see videos of him, and he still rips so hard. But
the style's so good.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
I think if you were to sum it up in one thing, he just always landed on his board. He had that really great style, and he just very rarely fell. You know, you'd never see him butt check. You never see him go down. Huge airs, always stomping it.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway, you know, Terry is a good guy. Some people, you know, have taken issue with whatever happened with all that, but I think ultimately he's got his heart's in the right place, and I think he's just a little misunderstood. And ultimately, he's one of my favorite riders to ever shoot. I'll tell you that, because every time he's one of those guys. Every time he hits the jump, you're going to get something.
Yeah, that's
He's a ripper.
He's one of those guys for you for sure. I can tell you the times that I saw him in the wild, or rode with him a couple of times. He was always very nice to people, to everybody.
Yeah, he was a good guy. He was kind of a prankster, you know. He's always kind of messing with people. We did a trip with Mike Hatchett. We did a trip to Hemsedal, Norway, with Terje, Jamie Lynn, and Daniel Frank.
Yes, I remember the images.
Yeah, there's a bunch of photos that ended up in the mag, and that was kind of a dream team trip. Great trip. Those guys all fed off each other too. Daniel didn't even speak English back then. It was, he was kind of the young upstart in the group.
Yeah.
But man, those guys were so good back then. I remember feeling
personality too. Daniel's personality is crazy.
Oh, it is crazy now, but back then he was a lot quieter, and he was, hanging out with Terje and Jamie were both older than him, and they were kind of picking on him and stuff like that. He was just a little kid, but he had a gift too,
Yes.
He was definitely a ripper. All those guys, but seeing those guys really at the really heart of their powers, at the peak of their powers, was pretty amazing. And I always felt a lot of I was always grateful to be able to have an opportunity to shoot with those guys. And I was always thankful to snowboarder and whatever my path was through life to be able to go on a trip like that with those guys during that time.
Still shoot skateboarding when you became staff photographer for Snowboarder, or did you?
I always loved shooting skateboarding.
Right.
I always tried to keep a skateboard influence in what I was doing. You know, and like I said previously, always trying to keep the lip in the photo. Always trying to keep a skate feel to it. Using a fisheye, that's something that kind of stands out. Fisheye, 16 millimeter fisheye is synonymous for skate photos. A lot of those guys, Grant Britton, Dan Sturt, those well-known skate photographers, Todd Swank, Mark Waters, Sin. I mean, the list goes on and on. All these big-time skate photographers. Some of those guys aren't with us anymore. Mark Waters passed from COVID a couple years back.
Shit.
That was really harsh. Sin died years ago. Rest in peace to those guys. Both great guys, great photographers. But everybody rocked the same rig pretty much. That 16 millimeter fisheye on like a Nikon FM2. This is what we were shooting film.
Yeah.
It became a very synonymous look for the skate photos. And then when I moved over to shooting snowboarding, I had a 16 millimeter fisheye, and I was shooting snowboarding, especially early on, using that fisheye, and it really kind of captured that skatey kind of look to it.
Totally. Yeah, and those guys were doing so much. I'm thinking of the Salaz shot with the flash.
Oh yeah,
up against the house.
Yeah,
up against the garage.
You can see the fisheye angle in that shot. I was right up there with the fisheye.
Yeah, there's
a few other shots too that are kind of from that period where you can really tell when you get up close with the fisheye because it has kind of a rounded view. Whereas if you use a wide angle lens like a 20 or an 18, you get this distortion that is a straight line rather than a rounded line. So the rounded lines allow you to get close and kind of keep everything in the frame. Whereas there are some shots I shot on that night shoot that we did with like Jamie and those guys where there's this one shot where Jamie's doing this like straight up frontside nose poke and his board looks really long in the front of it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of distorted a little bit. I think I had my 20 millimeter on there. And that was what happened when you shot with the 20 instead of the 16 is it took it out of that skate realm and turned it into more of a snowboard image.
Yeah.
And maybe it was maybe that was subtle for a lot of people, but I always really noticed it. The difference between those two lenses was the difference between skateboarding and snowboarding is the fisheye was skate in every regard. That when you moved away from the fisheye angle, you started to move out of the skate realm and into like more of a ski snowboard type of feel.
Right. I'm kind of dying to know what Bud said to you when you called him up.
I asked him, so I had gone out and tried to shoot a little bit of snowboarding, and I was used to shooting skateboarding with a flash.
Okay.
Skateboarding requires a pretty elaborate flash rig. Even in full sunlight,
yep,
you're shooting with a big side-mounted flash. These days, people shoot with two big flashes.
Is that because the person's going to have their back to the sun?
A lot of times their back's to the sun, but you're in real tight with that fisheye, and you're really looking to light up the image, light up the front of them.
So no shadows.
Yeah, it gets the shadows out of it. But a lot of guys like Dan Sturt, especially, to me, in my opinion, Dan Sturt was the best skateboarding photographer from that era, from the late 80s and the 90s. Even Grant Britton and those guys were great, but Dan Sturt was on a whole different level. He pioneered the whole slave unit side mount flash. He had these really elaborate flash rigs that he would create. He made this one. There's a photo of him somewhere in some old magazine where he had made this giant flash rig out of what I think was a scuba setup. I don't know if you've seen scuba cameras.
No.
The older scuba cameras, you have the camera right in the middle, and you have these metal bars that kind of go out, and they're sort of wavy, and you've got these huge flashes mounted way out at the end. And he had this huge one that had a flash way out at the end of this thing. And he would shoot at like Fallbrook Ramp and some of these other ramps, and there's a shot of him with somebody like Steve Clare or somebody that we used to shoot at Fallbrook all the time, and he's underneath the ramp on the underside of it. And it's a photo of him holding the big flash rig. And it's just such a great photo because I don't think there's ever another time where anybody truly documented exactly how out there he was going with these flash rigs. Snowboarding was a completely different operation. For one, snow is highly reflective. So if you have sun, it's a lot more reflective than if you're out there shooting on concrete or blacktop or something like that.
Right.
So the flashes were less prominent in snowboarding. Unless you were really getting some heavy shade, you weren't busting out the big flash rig. And that took me some time to adjust to. But anyway, so when I called Bud that day, and it was a huge turning point, that phone call. I remember I was on my little house phone, ring, you read the little roto dial, and I asked him, "What is the exposure you shoot at?" I'm like, "We divulged to me what exposure you're shooting at," like because my photos were coming blown out. And what was happening is on snow, the snow turns gray or it turns dark if you shoot for the same exposure without compensating for all that reflection that's going on.
Yep.
The meter in your camera will automatically make the photos underexposed because there's so much reflection. So it'll stop down automatically. So you had to kind of compensate for that a little bit. So he was shooting 100 speed film at 1,000 at 5.6 was what he told me. And
Rad.
He gave me those three numbers: 100 speed, 100 ISO film, 1,000 shutter speed, 5.6 was your aperture. Go out and do that. And I swear to God, for the next 20 years, my camera did not deviate from that setting.
That's amazing.
Like, he gave me the most precise information.
Yeah.
That like I can't tell you how many trips I took where my camera was 1,000 at 5.6 the whole trip. I got home and every photo is exposed perfect. It's like,
That's
Bud,
so sick.
I got to thank you again for that. I think I've told you before, but I'm going to tell you again. It's like that was a huge piece of information.
It is.
I always wondered if he kind of regretted telling it because him and I became we were competing for spots in the magazine.
Right, sure.
And you know what? Bud was always such a nice guy. He's one of those people that's always got a huge smile.
He still is. Yeah.
Total sweetheart. He's got a huge heart.
Yeah.
There was I never once felt adversarial nature from him or vibes from him. I never felt like we were competing. He was so kind to share that information with me that Bud's has always been one of my favorite people. I've always admired his work so much. He just shoots such fantastic photos, and he's just always been the nicest dude. He's always been open with information and kindness and jokes and fun, and he was always just one of the boys. And I was always just really grateful for his presence and his influence on things.
Yeah. You came in at a time where, when he's shooting for ISM,
yes,
he's not making any money.
No.
It's not like a career that he's looking at. But by the time you come in, there's a career to be made as a snowboard photographer.
Yeah.
And you took that knowledge and created a collective, right?
Yeah, we tried to do a little group of photographers. We did our progressive images thing for a while with my buddy Ken Hermer. Ken also passed away. This is probably 20 years ago now.
Wow.
But yeah, we kind of tried to do this thing and sort of step away from it. But you are right. Bud started a couple years before me. I remember Bud had photographed during the Squaw Valley opening, during the Western Front thing that we talked about. He has some stills from that era. Chris Roach, he was one of the first guys to shoot with Roach and Monty and those guys.
Yep.
Tucker Franson.
Sick shots, yeah.
Yeah, these guys were all the Grass Valley crew, and they were all ripping back
Tina
then.
and Mike, yeah.
And so Bud was probably there 2 years before me. And he had some Bob Klein and some Kidwell stuff too, you know, from the old Homewood to Homo half pipe, and he had shot with some of those guys. He was shot with Palmer. Him and Palmer were always really tight.
Really still are. Yeah.
Him and Palmer always got along really good. I think Palmer really respected Bud and probably still does. And some of the photos that Bud took of Palm are just all time in the American flag car with that, or with the, with the caddy and the suit and all that stuff. It was just, he created an icon out of Palm. It really helped him sort of achieve that status. But yeah, by the time I came in, I worked for Snowboarder for 1 year, and then the following season they launched their senior photographer program.
Yep.
And so that was the first time a magazine had really decided to jump on board with the notion of having a team of photographers that they paid really well. Actually, I can't say they paid us really well. I was always complaining about the fact that we had 6 photographers. I thought it was too many. I didn't think we needed that many. I'm like, you only need 3 or 4 photographers and just pay us a little better.
Yep.
But instead they had 6 guys, which, you know what? All those guys were great guys, though. I mean, I think we had Justin, Sedway, Chris Carnell, Chris Brunkart, myself, and
that's an amazing
there's probably one
lineup.
other that I'm forgetting. And whoever that, Dano. Dano was a senior guy, so that was 6. Sorry, Dano. Actually, Dano was really came into his own as a photographer during that time, and everybody over time developed a niche for themselves, and we ended up not really competing that much for the dollars, and
sure,
it ended up working out.
Yeah. And Dano joined your thing, did he not?
Yeah, he was in our little thing when we did the super pipe thing. We were part of that, and then that went on for a while. And I think one of the things that I was trying to get across in the industry was that I felt that we should have a common pay rate for everybody for photos, because some of the guys were getting paid less and some of the guys were getting paid more. And I wanted there to be a fair and equitable arrangement. But some of the other guys, like John Foster kind of came up in the Guy Motil, James Cassimus school of thought.
That makes sense.
And so he was kind of a little bit of a guy in the sky sort of photographer. He didn't really have a skate angle on it. Which John's photos, I have nothing bad to say about John. He was a great guy.
Yeah.
I always had a lot of respect for John, but his photos to me, they didn't really carry. Again, they didn't carry that skate mentality. And that always kind of annoyed me a little bit, because I came from the skate side of things, and being this sort of outspoken punk that I was back then, I probably pissed some of those guys off a little bit. Sure. I look back now and I think, I should have been a little bit more accommodating, a little bit more open-minded, but
sure.
I had my way of doing things, and I wanted to, this is my point of view on it. And I guess to me, I thought that should have mattered back then. And so when we try to do that whole progressive images thing and try to get the photographer crews to team up, I think the competition between the magazines kind of stood in the way. Like there was Dano and me and the Snowboarder crew, and then over at Transworld you had Cassimus, and you had Guy Motil. Guy Motil came straight out of the ski industry and kind of came over.
Foster was a surf photographer too, right? So
there's also Sonny. Sonny, what's his name?
Sonny Garcia.
Yes, not Sonny Garcia. What was his name?
Sonny Miller.
Sonny Miller. Sonny Miller always shot with this water housing, and I loved Sonny Miller. He was one of the coolest guys. He was super funny. He would always give people shit. Just a great photographer, a really nice guy. Another guy who's passed away long ago. But I think when I kind of try to get the photographers in the industry to kind of work together, I think that magazine thing kind of got in the way of what we were trying to do. Like the Transworld guys didn't like that Snowboarder magazine had started. Transworld was around for a little bit, and then Snowboarder kicked in, and Snowboarder was a Surfer magazine's publication, and Surfer and Powder were big publications back then. So when Doug Palladini took the position there was I want to believe there was a fair bit of money that went into the production of the magazine. They had a budget, and I think that probably bugged the Transworld guys, that these guys just come out of nowhere and they've got this money, and all of a sudden they're making this magazine, and now we have a competitor. And I'm sure the last thing that John Foster and Guy Motil and all those guys want to do is team up with the guys who worked for Snowboarder, because I think they looked down on us as kind of like, we were younger. John Foster is probably 15, 20 years older than me, I would think. I mean, he was older than me for sure. Yeah. Guy Motil was a generation before me. Right. And we were all young. I was 19.
And you're calling it progressive.
Yeah.
Progressive images. So it's like the progression of the sport. It's like, we're going to move away from classic photography.
Yes.
We're
trying to change the game a little bit here.
We're changing it. So, yeah.
And I was coming from the skate point of view, and those guys were all coming from the ski point of view. So I think all those sort of differences played a role in the difference of the thing. And again, I think a big point of this is like when I first submitted photos to Snowboarder, I was 19.
Wow.
20.
Yeah, you're a young,
I was super
strong kid.
Yeah,
with a good business sense. Like you're going, like we need to standardize this shit so people aren't getting rookie.
And I mean, really, that's what it came down to. Is they thought we were these young kids that they were older, they were more established, they were at the magazine. They didn't think that we should have gotten as much money for them for a photo of this guy, and so that's why they weren't really on board with that. That ended up not really. when I tried to kind of like do this sort of gathering of the photographers thing, it kind of backfired and sort of flailed because those guys just weren't on board.
Right.
Yeah.
So had they joined up, it probably would have changed or standardized the
probably,
industry a little bit more.
Yeah.
But without the old guard signing on to the new young kids idea,
it withered on the vine, so to speak.
You.
And what's interesting is like I still see this going on these days. Like the idea of selling a snowboard photo these days, especially with social media and stuff like this, it's such a different game compared to what it used to be.
I've got a friend, Chris Corbett, who's doing it. That he's right at he's got some momentum now. So he's shooting with great guys.
Yeah.
But he came in and still till now, like trying to get a bit of budget.
Yeah.
Like you go on a snowboard trip.
Yeah.
To the East Coast with some top level guys, you're going to be out of pocket a little.
Yeah, it costs money. It costs money to do these trips, especially if you want to do it right.
Yeah.
I even told the snowboarder, I was like, look, I'm not staying in freaking hostels anymore. I'm not renting the crappy Peugeot. I'm not going on the tightest budget possible. We've worked our ass off here. You want me to go with the top guys. You want us to get the great photos. We need to be comfortable. We need to be doing it right,
Yeah,
and they ended up giving us a nice travel budget. As time wore on, they ended up allowing us to sort of, reap the benefits of working with the best guys.
Because you're pushing back.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, some new young photographer that just wants to get the photos in the magazine will go and crash on a couch, drive his own car.
That's the whole point of it. There's kids that will do it for less.
Yes.
And so
yes.
And where I run into it these days is when I'm doing my prints and stuff like that. I sell a lot of prints. You can order my prints online, by the way, by reaching out to me on.
Yeah. Where do we get them from?
Best way to do it is to go on Instagram and contact me with a DM.
Yeah.
Sully Photos with a Z at Sully Photos is my Sean Sullivan. I started seeing that name on photos in the magazine. And I do believe he went through a period where he was a senior photographer with Snowboarder for a little while. I don't know how long that lasted.
Yep.
But he was using the same name. And I was starting to get bugged by it. I'd see the name and I'm like, I didn't take that photo. Obviously, at first I was like, I didn't take that photo. I didn't know there was another Sean Sullivan. Finally, I put it together. Okay, this is someone else with the same name, same spelling, everything.
Yeah.
And so I remember I talked to him at one point, and he was like, "Oh man," he's like, "I've always been a fan." He was right out of high school, I think, when the first time I talked to him, and he was like, "Oh, I showed your book to the class, at my high school and stuff," and he was kind of a fan.
Yeah,
for a while.
Dope.
And
not as his own, not like hey, look,
I want to believe
this.
that he didn't say that it was his book, but who knows, dude? I mean, after all the things that went down with him and I don't know what kind of shenanigans he pulled, but we reached a point where so many photos were getting run in the magazine and I was still having some stuff published that I kind of felt like there was some confusion going on. And so we reached a point where I called him up one day, or I sent him an email, and I was like, look, you got to change your name. I basically told him straight up.
Right.
Like, this just isn't going to fly anymore. And at first he kind of seemed to understand. I'm like, I'll just put your middle name in there or do something. I'm like, and the example I gave him is like Screen Actors Guild. Actors, okay?
Yeah.
You can't be Brad Pitt. Even if your name is Brad Pitt.
You'd have to be Bradley Pitt.
Brad L.
Pitt,
Pitt, or Brad Pitt
exactly.
Sr. or whatever.
Sure.
But if you want to sign up with the Screen Actors Guild and you want to be a represented actor, you have to create your own name. Your name is a brand.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Right.
Your name is a brand.
Yeah.
My name was a well-established brand in the snowboard industry, the skateboard industry to a lesser extent. These days it's the fishing industry that I'm shooting mainly sport fishing. But he was offended by that after a while, and it started at first it wasn't a big deal, but it started to fester over time, where I was starting to hear things through the grapevine that he was kind of like, unhappy with the arrangement. And then I think one time we spoke and he was like, well, that was really effed up that you made me change my name. And I'm like, I didn't make you do anything. I asked you, and it was obviously the right thing to do, and I stand by that. Right. I'm not going to change how I feel about that. I'm like, I felt you were using my name to sort of build up your own name, and hey, if there's confusion, so be it, and I'm like, and that doesn't fly with me. I work too hard to just let somebody else kind of tread on my thing. And so things got progressively worse with us. I think he was bitter, and especially when I started working kind of for frequency and started getting into the sport fishing space, as I started to move away from snowboarding in the mid 2000s. you know, 2012, 2014, that era. He was doing work for like Orvis, and he was doing a lot of fly fishing work like this.
Oh, wow.
And so this all culminated in this one time he had this girl call me up, and I instantly could tell what was going on. Because there had been a little bit of a buzz about him and I, and how I had made him change his name or asked him to change his name. And so this girl calls me up and she's like, "Oh, I work for the National Park Service, or I work for Orvis, or we're working with Orvis Fly Fishing Company, and we want to hire you to do this photo shoot." And he was like an Orvis staff photographer or something like that.
Right.
Or she said I had gotten your name from Orvis.
Oh,
Orvis is
I
a
see.
massive fly fishing brand.
Right,
I got your name
right.
from Orvis. We want to hire you to come shoot our fly fishing thing in Yellowstone National Park, and we'll pay you all this money. And I immediately was like, "Look, I'm the wrong Sean Sullivan.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to call this other guy." And this had been happening. I mean, this was happening. You know, every other month I would get a call for. It still happens. I mean, I had people just in the past couple months probably had this happen 3 times in the past 3 months. I've had people, wrong Sean Sullivan, dude. I'm like, you got to go talk to this guy. But she called me, and I was like, I explained what was going on. She's like, "Oh, okay, thanks," and hung up the phone. 10 minutes later, I get a phone call from Sean. "What's up, bro?" You know, and he's kind of wasted. I could tell they were like sitting around drinking, and I could hear this girl and the people in the background. "That was my girlfriend. That was my friend. Sorry, man." You know, and you know, we were just fucking with you. And I'm like, "No, you're not. You're calling to see if I'm gonna poach your clients." And I'm
Right.
like, "Dude, screw you, man." I'm like, "Don't be calling me and trying to pull shit like that." I'm like, "I don't care who the hell you think you are, calling me and trying to like put me in a position where you're gonna catch me,
Right.
you know, like trying to run some scam on you." And you know what? I didn't. I told that girl that to call you. I'm like, and that's what I always do. I'm like, "You think I'm that stupid?" I mean,
Right.
I'm like, I was pissed, dude. I told this kid, I'm like, "Don't be freaking calling me trying to pull shit like this."
Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
like, "Are you and I are gonna have it out at some point, you know?" And I'm not gonna take kindly to it, and
Right,
you know, and
man.
I don't want it to end up in a situation where we run into each other somewhere and it turns into a thing. I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not looking for that,
Right.
you know. But I am gonna defend my position. I am gonna defend my name, and I'll grow up, dude. You stay on your side. You work your side of the street. I'll work my side of
Sure.
the street. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And let's just keep it like that. And then he was like, "Well, that's when one of the times on that same phone call, the conversation instantly turned. Well, that was really fucked up that you made me change my name." I'm like, "Dude, that's
Right.
the name of the game, dude."
Yeah.
I told him, like, I had it first.
Right.
I had the name first. Sorry.
Yeah.
Too bad for you.
Yeah,
know,
you would. Yeah. So Jeremy Jones and Jeremy Jones, I'm sure they would have similar stories, but that they went back so far that they were like, you know what?
I saw a meme.
Jason Brown. It's like
I saw a meme
whatever,
for Jeremy
whatever.
Jones just like 2 weeks ago. They came up. Someone had, "Guys, it's the same name," and it's like Jeremy Jones and Jeremy Jones. They funnel into the same thing. I even
Yeah.
think those guys even made a road for the same team for everyone. I don't know. Maybe not. No, because
Possibly.
Jeremy Jones was on Burton, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
and the other Jeremy Jones was like on Rosignol.
Yeah, I don't think they've ever been on the same
No,
team.
you're
but-
right. You're right about
But
that.
they're close. But I told Backcountry Jeremy Jones, he's got Jones Snowboarding. So I told Street Jeremy Jones,
Yeah.
you should make a company called Jones Snowboards.
You totally. I mean, I
because
do
you'd
wonder-
already have the brand recognition from the other Jones.
Absolutely.
Like, so this is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That would be a dick move. He laughed about it, and it was a joke, obviously, right? Like you would, and
You can't really do
couldn't
that.
Do it.
Yeah,
You couldn't
You couldn't do it. You couldn't righteously do it.
Right. So the Sean Sullivan thing.
Yeah.
I always thought I was relieved when he
Yeah.
used Sean Carrick Sullivan.
Yeah, I was
because
too.
I was
It
like,
just
I
made it
can,
so much
I
easier.
can tell.
Here's the thing: is it was funny until it was not.
Right,
With him, it was
right,
funny
sure,
until those
sure.
guys tried to
Yeah.
kind of run game on me that one day on the phone, and that's when the whole situation changed for me. I went from like not really making a stink about it to basically telling the guy to go F himself. I'm
Yeah,
like, dude,
yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to deal with this shit, and I don't want to hear from you again. I'm like, dude, lose my number. And I,
man.
and I was kind
That
of getting
sucks.
texts from him and stuff
Yeah.
sometimes, and I had to block. I've been blocked on social
Yeah,
media. I
yeah.
had to, and it's too bad. Him and I could have been friends. Him and I could have worked it out, but
Right.
that's the way these things go. And I've tried to put myself in his position and be like, how would I handle it? And I was like, just out of my own integrity, I would never be like, well, if they know it's him or don't know it's him, not a big deal.
Yeah.
I'll get a little bit of press off it. No,
Right,
I'm not.
right.
I shoot my own photos. I do my own work. I make my own name for myself. I'm never going to ride on someone else's coattails.
Yeah.
So.
Let's talk about the book. Let's pivot to the book.
Sure.
When did the book come out for the first time?
So I left snowboard around 2002, and I had already had this idea of creating a book of all my snowboard work. And so I had compiled this book. I got a bunch of photos scanned. I was shopping it around. I had worked in Photoshop. Yeah, we'll hold it up here. Here's the new edition of Lines.
This is the second edition.
Yeah, this is edition number 2. It's got the hardcover. The other edition has a soft cover. The edition Carlton did. Shred till you're dead.
Thanks, buddy.
You know, a lot of the photos in here have been. This is the new edition that I just made. Maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I put it out.
Is that the same Jamie Lynn shot on the back?
It is. Yeah, it's got
beautiful.
The iconic method shot. There's some cool shots in here. I think
Is that from the Super Pipe shoot?
It is. So yeah, I think we touched on that briefly, but that shot was. The pipe wasn't even done.
Right.
And actually, that shot is in one of the freestyle moments. You can see the method air.
Right,
yeah,
right,
in like Riders on the
I
Storm.
love
or
that
like that
stuff.
Yeah.
I love when you can see the shot in the film.
Yep.
That's something I like.
So anyway, I had all these photos from doing snowboarder and doing skating, and I was leaving snowboarder. When I left snowboarder, things were there was a fair bit of animosity in the air. Mark Sullivan and those guys were kind of changing the nature of the magazine. Doug Palladini was taking a step back. It became more of a Bridges, Mark Sullivan operation, and those guys were from the East Coast, and they were really changing the nature of the magazine. They were turning more about jibs and spins, and they were running. You remember when we went through that time where we were running those like the sequences where it's all on one page,
yep.
Morph sequence.
Yeah,
those
totally.
became like the big thing for a while. And I was coming from, and this is probably on me for my refusal to sort of evolve, but I was coming from like the fresh powder backcountry. Tahoe, hit the jump and skate style, but we don't have to make the whole magazine hitting rails and all this stuff. And
okay, sure.
And so I ran into this situation with those guys where I was becoming increasingly hostile towards the notion of what the magazine was representing in the sport. I thought we were sort of losing our soul, and I didn't want to pivot away from that. I wanted to keep shooting it. And coming from a skateboarding point of view too, you would think that I'd be like, more rails.
That's what I'm thinking right now. I'm like,
totally.
What the hell?
Yeah, that kind of in a way
rails,
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, a little bit doesn't. Right.
But there was a piece of me, and I still feel this way, that had trouble finding the authenticity in the notion of hardcore skateboarding on a snowboard. Skateboarding, and this came later. Like when I first started, I was all gung-ho about the skateboarding transition over to snowboarding thing, and I loved the way the airs were done and the tricks you're doing. But as time evolved, and even now my mentality has changed, I look at it a little differently because the reason is because skateboarding, the board is not strapped to your feet.
Correct.
Okay,
right.
Snowboarding, the board is strapped. The idea of an ollie on a snowboard, you're not snapping the tail.
It's true.
You're bouncing off the flex of the board.
Yeah, it's more of a bunny hop.
Yeah, it's more of a bunny hop.
Because you're attached.
You're
to
attached.
It. Yeah.
Ultimately, your feet being attached to the board removes a certain level of legitimacy when it comes to the idea of doing skateboard tricks. Like when I see guys nollie on something, I'm kind of like, I don't know.
It's a style. Like I can include all styles, but
to each their own.
What you're saying.
And before I start getting hate mail from all you street skaters out there, listen, I appreciate any and all kinds of, and it's to each their own. Ride the way you want to ride.
Right.
You want to strap the board to your feet. You want to do it on a snow skate. You want to ollie off a big jump onto a handrail. You know what? Whatever stokes you out. It's all about how it feels on the hill. So please don't send me email telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. And you're probably right. I probably don't know what I'm talking about. So, but point being is that my idea of what is radical in snowboarding has evolved over time.
Yep.
And one of the big changes is like I see some of the stuff I see online these days, guys doing handrails and stuff like this. Some of the rails are gnarly. Okay, there's some gnarly stuff out there going on.
X Games Real Snow, which is wildly misnamed because it's like street shit all over the place, cracked open this creative street riding that it's insane.
Yeah,
it's
some
insane.
of it is absolutely bonkers. But then occasionally you'll have this clip on come out where this guy like rides down a cement ledge on a snowboard, and he sort of jumps and rides down this little thing, and it's like supposed to be this gnarly thing, and I was like, there's nothing gnarly about that. You know, my grandma could strap in and ollie on that little cement ledge and ride it down the 5 stair.
Sure.
I just think that I guess my thing is if you're gonna put yourself up on social media and you're gonna like claim it, you know, make it something sick, make it badass, make it something new, different. Push the envelope a little bit, you know, and that's a tall order these days. Pushing the envelope these days with what the kids are doing is asking a lot, because the envelope's pretty gnarly right now, and the stuff that the guys who are doing the gnarly rails are so gnarly. Like there's guys where like, you know, they freaking flip onto the wall ride and come off the wall ride onto the rail, or
it's nuts.
You know, you get this only 2-foot ramp and they do a 20
You
stair.
want to find that sweet spot between like incredibly difficult circus looking shit and like styly.
Yes, the style factor is an important part of it.
It's such a difficult balancing point, but like for some people that aren't us, that's not what they're looking for.
The bottom line is the board, my advice to these snowboarders that are coming up these days is don't ever lose sight of the fact that the board is strapped to your feet.
Sure.
And you are generally, you know, riding snow. And so there are no wheels on the board.
Yeah.
It is not skateboarding. It's snowboarding. It's a different sport. And just keep in mind that if you're going to present yourself out there on social media, or you're going to try to claim something's gnarly, make it gnarly. That's all I'm saying. Is like, or just ride and go and have fun. It doesn't mean you can't do those things. But if you're gonna do the high and mighty claim after you do something crazy, let's see something crazy. Because I do see a fair bit of stuff online that I look at and I'm like, there's just nothing gnarly about that. Sure. And I think that's my little like bone that I have to pick with that is I would like to see if you're going to claim it as being crazy and burly, then let's make it crazy and burly, because the board is strapped to your feet. And ultimately, you know, skateboarding, you grind a 20 stair rail or something. That's gnarly. Okay, the board's not strapped to your feet. You all lead up onto it.
Yeah.
You're grinding it. At any time, you could jump off, and the board's going to fly one direction, and you're going to fly the other direction. To me, that is legit gnarly. You're landing on concrete. Yeah. You know, there's just another level of...
Snowboard gnarly's different, like you were saying. Like, snowboard, I mean, it can be different. Now guys are doing the same stuff in skating and snowboarding. That's one thing. But, like, Alaska, you know, like big, hairy lines.
Yes.
Backcountry freestyle. Stuff with style, you know, like that's the thing is like it's progressing in so many different ways.
Yeah.
It's wild to see, and I saw it the other day, the 2160. There's a couple of people that have done 2160s now. And
snowboarding can be gnarly. That's the whole thing I think I'm trying to say is there's no point in emulating skateboarding and doing these kind of dumpy little tricks. If the board is strapped to your feet and if you want to get gnarly, you can get as gnarly as you want to go. There's huge cliffs out there. There's giant freaking rails out there.
Yeah.
The level of riding that snowboarding needs to be at to achieve gnarly is a lot. The airs are much bigger than you're going to do on a skateboard.
Oh, way
you know,
bigger, yeah.
I mean, you saw that one Japanese kid who did the air out of the half pipe just a week ago. What was like
Kaishi,
22, 24 feet out or something like that.
Unbelievable.
You're never gonna. I mean, maybe on one of the super ramps you might see a skateboarder do that. You know, they go pretty big.
Yeah, there was a time when Danny Way was doing all the mega ramp stuff where I was like, snowboarding is a little embarrassing right now.
Yeah.
Like, we're strapped to the fucking thing.
But when you're seeing guys huck sevens off like 40, 50-foot cliffs and they're stomping it and it's being filmed on a drone.
Yeah, stuff is gnarly now.
Stuff is gnarly.
My feed is curated to where the things that I'm seeing. Yeah. There was a backflip at Brighton the other day that's just like everything about the whole filming of it is like perfect.
Sure.
It's incredible.
I think I saw that shot. The guy was riding powder off
and
a cliff.
It's like
stomps it.
Yeah, and I think Seth Hewitt filmed it and he's like, holy fucking shit. Like, so you keep watching it over and you're like, holy
I've watched that a few
shit.
times.
Isn't that perfect? Like, it's just such a perfect, he doesn't even grab his board, but
it's awesome.
He comes around so perfect and the landing is just
so stomped. You know what's funny is when you're doing that, you're watching footage and you maybe you like get distracted and you set your phone down for a second and it's looping. Yeah. And just like you said, holy fucking shit. Holy fucking shit. It does it like 3 times over and over and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm still watching that. But anyway, so the back to the book. The book came out in 2003, the original copy.
Yep.
21 years ago. The book was okay. I look back at it now, and it's pretty rudimentary compared to what people are doing now. So this new edition, I have tried to go in here and update some of the crappy scans we had in the other book.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, some of the scans are tighter. I did move some of the photos around. I did add some sort of new photos. Here's Chris Roach doing a grasser up at Mount Hood. That's when he was riding for D-Day. I mean, that's probably like, 26?
Sick butter. Yeah, and look at his style. He's just got all black.
There's
I
another
love
shot,
Chris.
There's another shot of Roach. Here's Jamie at the Super Pipe.
Oof,
both
those are
shots.
both sick.
He's on the blue rail, doing that lip slide, doing the big method air.
It is a pretty deep pipe. I'm looking at you can see there on the opposite wall, the guy standing in the flat.
Yeah.
It's decent.
I think that's like Morier, one of those pipe digger kids. Like, you can see Kevin Young kind of walking around up here. He had those multicolored pants. That's pretty funny.
I love this stuff. So it's all snowboarding, this one?
This one, yeah, there's a little bit of skating in the front.
Yeah, I thought there was a couple shots.
There's Justin
Brush.
Mooney doing the huge cliff at Baker.
Oh, my God.
I'm not a Baker. That's at Donner Summit.
Yeah.
That's
Is that off the road?
It's a popular climbing area called the Snowshed Wall. Those two cracks are really popular in the summer for rock climbing.
Holy fuck, that's big.
But yeah, this a lot. I wanted this book to capture the era when I was shooting.
Yeah. I think there's something very, very special about that era.
I absolutely agree. I believe the 90s have evolved. And, the reason I can say this is because in the past few years, and here's a great shot of Roach doing his grasser. And you can see, look at him. He's grabbing in front of his foot.
Yep.
But that's still like textbook. He's got the hand in front of his face.
Yeah, man.
Great
style.
I think that there's something about the Noah Selaznick, Jamie Lynn, Sean Palmer era that has taken on sort of a sort of an important status now these days. I think that it's good that the sport is looking back to the people who sort of set the pace early on, and these guys were all kind of outlaws back then, and I think their memory and their contribution to the sport has to be respected, and it has to be acknowledged, and it has to be celebrated.
I agree. It's like when I was a kid, we played basketball. We didn't think about who invented basketball.
Yeah.
I think that's how it is for a kid today. This is a story I'm telling myself, that a kid that comes into snowboarding today, they might not even know who Shaun White is, if you can imagine.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Like, that's how far
and they definitely
we've
don't
come.
know who Sean Palmer is. Or
right. Craig Kelly.
Yeah, Craig Kelly.
Yeah, when I was up at Snow Summit with Eric Blem, he was just asking randoms, who Craig Kelly is. We're talking to kids that are, 20 to 30.
And they're like, who?
No. Right? Like the older guys, everybody knows, obviously. Like the one older guy we talked to, he's like, yeah, I had a Craig board.
Yeah.
Like, Craig was so prolific in that time.
He was.
But so was Brush, Palmer. Like, these dudes set the standard. Even, Rob Morrow and that whole Morrow team.
For sure. With
Todd Richards and Noah Brandon, Jana Mayan. Like, these are the people that I love. I was talking to Cara Beth Burnside when I was down in California. I'm like, CB was so important.
She was one of the early female pioneers, and now girls play a huge role in the sport.
Right, and on top of it, she fought for equal prize money. She boycotted either X Games.
She was a ripping skater too back then.
She was a ripping skater. Yeah. Right. So she, and that's what all these guys that you just mentioned and I just mentioned were also doing. They were advocating for the sport.
Absolutely.
They were showing, whether it was Jamie Lynn with no gloves and always in very, very good style.
Yeah.
Like, this is a standard we want to set for ourselves.
Yeah.
Or if it was Craig, just opening up new terrain.
Yeah.
And fresh perspectives on what's really important in snowboarding.
Absolutely. He's one of the pioneers as far as bringing the backcountry into the living room and, making it okay. It doesn't have to be steep and deep. Just go out there and have fun with yourself. Enjoy the mountains. That's his message always. And, it was such a tragic loss that he died so early on. He was getting ready to move into a new phase of his whole career when all that happened. And what a tragedy. Just a life cut way too soon, And so I think that his memory carries on, though. He's larger than life now. I mean, his birthdays and I hate to say it, his death day, they're celebrated and remembered every year. We're going on 21 years now since he was killed in that avalanche.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just, that was rough, and that had such a huge impact on the industry and so many people. And I think it's great too that Eric Blem has taken upon himself, up the mantle of writing that book and really getting the story out there about what happened. And
such a next level thing too. It's unbelievable. The level. So Eric's already a New York Times bestselling author, so he can write.
Yeah. And
I'll tell you, I read the book. It's. I remember when he was talking about how long it was in pages. I thought, oh yeah, like 150 pages or something. It's like 320 pages.
Wow.
I read it in like 2 or 3 nights.
Sure.
I was just like completely gripped in this story, and it's written in that way that brings you back to reading. So if you're a listener, you're listening to this, and you're thinking, what can I do to stop the fucking death scroll? Because I am getting worse and worse in the number of hours a day that I find myself watching fucking cat videos, for Christ's sake.
Oh, I love cat videos.
Kids falling down and people farting on each other. It's so dumb.
It's funny how I was telling someone the other day how the algorithm always leads you to like these arrest, resisting arrest videos.
Oh my God, I watch that so often.
And I'm like, how did I get on this? I'm like, where do I find more cat videos?
I watch the ones where the cop does something, but the guy knows his rights. Yeah, I love those. Like where
they always end up getting hauled away or tased or something like that. You're like,
man,
God,
it's crazy. So that Eric wrote the book. Is not just a gift to Craig, his family, the snowboard community, just to the world. Like,
absolutely,
it's going to be an incredibly well-received book.
I'm excited to read that, and I think it's important to carry on. Craig's got an enduring legacy that is important to snowboarding almost as much now, if not more so, than it was back in the day.
Yeah. So his publisher has been generous and given me a few copies of the book to give out to listeners of the show. Oh, awesome. So I've got to come up with a good way to select for people to give them away. So awesome. That's something I'm going to work on.
Maybe you could come up with like some trivia or something like what was Craig's first board or name something, or there's a Craig had a mission when he was gonna move away from being a pro snowboarder that people have talked about, and maybe you could get people to tell you what that mission was. And it's a lot of people know what it is.
Yeah.
I won't say it here on the air because you can maybe get some kids to. But it probably would have changed the nature of the sport had he achieved his goal.
Mm-hmm.
That involved riding in both the northern and southern hemispheres and riding all year round and stuff like that. So I hope that some guys are somebody someday is able to make that plan a reality.
Yeah, dude. I lucked out in anchoring the show to Craig early on. I just felt like people opened up. If I would call you up and just be like, hey, I want to do a podcast about you, and you're like, what the hell's a podcast?
Yeah.
As soon as I started asking questions about Craig, people would light up.
Sure.
Yeah, I rode with Craig. Like, I fucking shot with Craig. Like,
he was pre-cancellation era. He was pre so many things. He lived and sort of resided in a simpler time for the sport and for the world. I mean, you look back on the way the world was back then compared to where it is now, and it's like, it's definitely different. Anyway, it was an unfortunate loss, and I want to give a shout out to his daughter and his family. They've done well to protect his legacy, which is something that not everybody out there has. Someone kind of watching over them and making sure that people don't take advantage of their name and their place in the industry. So
I agree with you totally. On that note, when Sonny Miller passed, there was a bit of struggle in the family for who's gonna get his archive, which the family recognized as important.
Yes,
but maybe that was actually to the detriment of like the actual stuff being put into somebody's hands that can bring it back to the community.
Yeah.
Right? Like people fighting over it. Do you have, I'm sure you've got, actually, I was going to ask you about that with your book. Like, so you leave Snowboarder, they've printed these photos. Who owns them?
I own the photos always. I mean, they never acquired any kind of exclusivity do the photos.
So, but you get paid when they run the photo.
Yeah, you get paid for a usage.
And so does that end at a point, or is that
I think they have like a year rights that they don't want that photo to end up in another book or magazine.
Right.
But
that makes sense.
by the time the book came out, things had kind of soured between me and some of those guys at the magazine. And much of those things were my own fault. Things I definitely could have done differently.
Sure.
Just kind of being hot under the collar about certain things, letting things kind of get to me or taking things personal. I think I saw my influence waning over time, and I saw my situation changing, and I probably, reacted to that in a way that, I was kind of defensive about it. And I look back now, and it's like it all seems kind of stupid,
Huh.
But
well, it's the ultimate cool guy club for a snowboarder.
Sure.
You're at the magazine called Snowboarder.
Yeah, and you're kind of calling the shots in the direction of the industry in a lot of ways.
You're a gatekeeper.
You look at Pat Bridges, and he has been very much a gatekeeper in the direction of the sport and sort of the mentality of the sport, and he's done well to keep the sport fun and cool and awesome in the face of a tidal wave of corporate interests and people trying to sculpt and sort of shape the image and shape the sport in an image they see for it.
Right.
And Pat is one of the people who has managed to keep some semblance of non-ski, non-corporate vibe to it, which that's got to be a real struggle. I would think.
Plus he's also got this guru historian thing going too.
Yeah.
Like, did you watch the Jake movie?
I have not seen that. Actually.
You got to see it. You got to see it.
Yeah,
it's great for any snowboarder to watch.
Yeah.
And it's very emotionally engaging.
Yeah.
And they got very tight with the family and with the struggles he was going through, which were gnarly.
Yeah.
Pat has huge parts that he plays in that with
awesome.
the snowboard history.
Pat has a very interesting way of talking about stuff too. He articulates himself in a way that I find really compelling and really fascinating. And I get on the phone with him, and he's always such a pleasure to chat with. And I love hearing his take on things. He always has this knack for putting a positive spin on it, or finding a way to turn a negative into a positive. And
he's an available person too when you're talking to him.
He is, and I admire that.
He's there,
So much love to Pat. I love what he's done and been able to maintain the sport and keep
Slush
a cool
is going
factor.
off.
Yeah,
That's
Slush
great.
is killing it.
Yeah.
And you know what? He's worked really hard to create something that's cool, and he deserves to have a good magazine. He deserves the respect that he's getting. He's earned it through hard work and really putting himself out there. So big shout out to Pat.
Yeah, and he took your idea and ran with it with the Super Park stuff for
that was kind of a
so
sticky
long.
point back in the day, though. I remember because I left the magazine and I was like, there was a moment where I was like, I'm gonna sue those guys, screw the magazine. They took my idea and
right.
And I never signed a contract saying they had exclusive rights. Maybe I did, and I just don't remember. But I don't remember signing away all my rights to those things. And they made a lot of money off Super Park. I mean, I always felt I should have gotten some residual check every time they ran an event. But years after I left the magazine, they did invite me up to come shoot, and they did run a couple of my photos. And it was always kind of cool to come and hang with those guys. And
isn't that it? What the recognition that comes all of a sudden. These things that that's what's happened for me over the years is these people that I was mad at for, using me up in the snowboard industry, and not paying me properly.
Yeah.
Well, then they say something nice about me in a magazine and print, and I'm like, oh, this guy's my guy.
Yeah, you know what? It's all water under the bridge at this point.
But I think I'm hearing a theme here with, you took your photos when you left, you made a book because they're your photos.
Yes.
It would have been nice to be able to do the same thing with the Super Park thing, but so many people had worked on it by that point, and
they had.
Yeah.
I mean, I had submitted the original idea. I felt like I owned the concept of it.
Right.
But you know what? I've never been a litigious person.
Right. And it's kind of like Terry Kidwell should be getting a residual for every board that's got a fucking kicktail.
For sure. Every board that every method error that some kids does in the quarter pipe, he should be getting like 10 cents or something like that.
But the kicktail thing is like really important because
is,
if we were still doing just swallowtails, we wouldn't have this fucking beautiful sport we have.
That's true.
But then at some point it becomes kind of ridiculous because you're starting a company and You're not paying. He didn't patent the thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I did.
And patents wear out and over the course of time.
One thing I will say for those guys though is I always believed that no matter how much I felt it was my idea, they did it right. They treated the legacy with the respect that it deserves by making that event killer each year and making it a hugely progressive event.
Huge,
they did
esteem.
justice to the concept.
Huge esteem for the people that, like a Jess Camara talking about being invited to Super Park.
Yeah.
Like career building, total difference between before Super Park and after.
Absolutely.
It was like such a prestigious event.
Yes. Yeah. And so I there was never once in all the years that they did the event and I wasn't part of the magazine, there wasn't a single time where I looked at an issue and said, they've turned this thing into something so stupid.
Right,
they totally ruined it. I never said that even once. I would look through the mag and be like, these guys are killing it.
That's cool.
These guys have carried forth the idea of get the best riders in the world, build the best facility in the world, and let them do their thing.
Where did you get the idea from? Was there already something in skateboarding that you were biting?
No, that was an original concept I came up. I think maybe what originally started it is I've always had this principle in photography or in snowboarding. This goes for anything really. Shooting is you need to what do they call it? A Venn diagram. Where you have like 3 different circles or 4 circles. And you have something in the middle.
Yes.
In the middle is the word gold. Okay, and in snowboarding you have cold conditions, powder, sun. Okay, you get all those lines to cross in the middle, and you're going to have gold. Okay?
Sure.
If you have 2 of those situations, cold conditions, sunlight, but no powder, you're riding ice and bulletproof ice. If you have great powder but graybird, you're not going to get any photos in the shitty graybird conditions. If you have powder but it's not cold, it's going to turn to hot pow, and you're going to be screwed. You really need all the elements to come together.
And you need the best snowboarders in the world.
Yeah.
You need the best features ever built.
Exactly.
Best photographers.
That was what brought it together for me. Cool. Was when I early on recognized the need to have all those parameters filled to really get a truly like day of the season out on the hill, one of the days that really made the season. You needed all these elements to come together, and you're gonna have plenty of days where you're gonna get 2 of them, but you might only have a handful of them where you get all 3 of the elements to fall into place. You got the right crew.
Yeah.
You got the great snow conditions.
Yeah.
You're on the hill. The conditions are ice cold, freezing. The 2 feet of fresh powder. All those things come together, and you got the right guys. You're gonna go out there and get gold. But if you're missing any of those things, I can't tell you how many days I've had 2 feet of snow and cold and just had no one to shoot with, or I had some B team, and trust me, there's been plenty of days out there with the B team, and a lot of times you get stuck with these guys, and this is no offense towards anyone in particular, but there's plenty of guys out there that are sort of the B pros, they're kind of scared. And I'll be standing up saying something like, Jamie Lynn would hit this thing. He'd be freaking hucking over this thing, Or
Kearns used to say, "Don't make me go up and hit that," to like the forum team. Like if I'm willing to hit it, you better go fucking hit this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you had Peter Line. Peter Line was always somebody who would always go huge off anything. He would hit the littlest bump and go 20 feet out on it.
Yeah.
He was never afraid of anything. He would just charge. He'd hit his switch.
Yes.
And
Legend.
So. There was a lot of dealing with guys who, it's just happened a lot when you get hired by a company. A company would hire you. They'd see the photos you took in snowboard or what the images of the Noah Selazniks and the Palmers and the Jamies, and then they've got the B team,
sure,
and they'd send you out with these guys, and they're like, we want you to make it look like so and so, and you're like, it's not gonna happen.
I was that guy, dude. I was on some shoots with Sedway and those. I mean, Berger made a couple of cool shots of us happen,
sure,
but we did have to send it as big as we'd ever sent it in our lives.
And if the photographer's doing his job, he's gonna get some shots. But you understand.
But also, I'm sure Berger isn't like, if I had him on the show, he wouldn't be like talking about the time he got to shoot with the 2 shitty Ice Age B team guys.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I mean, for every great day out there with the A team, there was probably 2 or 3 days with like the B guys where you'd build some crappy kicker and then 2 of the guys wouldn't hit it. There's a rock down there, and you're like, dude, just go hit it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go find something that you guys can do.
Yeah.
All right, it's okay, guys.
Yeah.
We'll go to the kiddie park over here, and you guys can freaking,
Yeah, what about off this? And you're like, I'll try to make it Look, let me get my fisheye.
And then the other thing too is like if you'd give them a little shit about it, and they'd, well, what are you freaking hit it? I'm like, dude, I'm not the guy claiming pro snowboarder here.
Yeah.
That's you. My job is to operate the camera. I'll get down there and stand next to the jump where you're about to hit me in the face with the snowboard.
Yeah.
I'll go put myself at risk.
Yeah.
But I'm not the guy here who's claiming I'm good enough to be sponsored. You're the guy who your company sent you here. You're being paid to throw it
Your
out
job
there.
is make it do the thing that I take a picture of.
And you know, I can honestly say that in all the years of having that mentality, I had very few injuries. You know, I never had anyone die on my watch. You know, my buddy Pat A broke his leg of North Cascades. That, you know, that's a pretty well-known incident, you know. And that's funny, kind of, because we'd been hitting this jump and it was powder. But I had told him to go bigger off this jump. I'm like, dude, you got to go bigger.
Oh,
you got to go. And this next jump, he went huge, and he freaking landed out in the flat and fully broke his leg. We had to get him helied out of there. I always felt horrible about that. I'm sorry, Pat. And we've had that conversation a lot. But really, the only injuries that I ever had on my watch as a photographer was that, and I was doing a shoot at Baker for Mervyn, and they had this kid. And it was Todd Schlosser and Dave Lee were my guys, and then this kid was from like Vermont or something. He had never been to Baker, and Baker's gnarly. Baker's one of the gnarliest mountains out there, especially when it's gray and it's bottomless, wet, heavy powder.
And you're from Vermont.
Yeah, and you're from Vermont. You've never
luck.
seen anything like that.
Yeah.
And then you've got these two guys like Dave and Todd that rule the mountain. I mean, these guys could ride anything.
Yeah.
I mean, Schlosser was such a dominator on steep terrain, but he could huck off the jump. He could do huge methods. He's one of the most underrated riders ever, in my opinion.
He's so good.
He was so good.
Yeah.
He just, you know, he never really got his, even though we got cover shots and we got all these shots, I always just thought he was one of the top dogs that deserved more recognition. But I digress. Back to the story. This one kid from Vermont or Maine or something like that. So we're doing this Mervyn shoot, and they break us up. Tony Welch is there. You know, great photographer.
Sick, Tony.
Yeah, awesome Tony. And Tony and I have a fun history too, going way back to my first time riding at Baker. But so they split us up into groups, and it's deep snow, deep freaking powder, and the sun was kind of cracking out a little bit. You know, you get these sucker holes up there.
Yeah.
And so they send me and Dave Lee and Todd and then this kid from Vermont. And we go and find this cliff, and it's maybe a 20-foot cliff, and it's got this flat spot right in the front of it. And so you got to pop off it, and you got to kind of gap it. It's maybe like maybe here to the wall where it starts to roll over.
Yep.
And Dave and Todd both, and I told them I was sitting below, and I'm like, okay, you got to get some speed. You got to kind of pop off it. And they look over and like, oh, I see it. These guys were pros. They knew what they were doing. So they hit it, and they stick it, and they get these 6 shots. And then this kid goes off, and he just rolls off the end of it.
Oh, no.
And, like, he hit his face on his knee.
Oh, God,
He's got this
no.
huge split right here where his knee had like, cut his lip open. And you could lift it up and see. It was like Rocky where they cut his eye.
Yeah.
You could, like, see the teeth in there. And so we go down. I was like... Oh, and this is like the first thing we did of the day.
Yeah.
We go down, and Paul Farrell and these other guys who were running the company were down there at the bottom or whatever. And we see this guy. They see this guy. They're like, what happened? And I was like, Vermont, you know. He's from Vermont, and we're at Baker. This is what happens, you know. And
poor kid.
But they weren't having it. They were like, they made me change out of my gear and drive him down to Bellingham and go to the hospital. And I was like, you guys are standing around in here. I was kind of bent. I was like, you know, you send me up with this rookie, this total B team kid who doesn't know what he's doing. He's never been here.
Right.
The kid destroys himself, and you guys, and they ended up. I don't think I worked for Mervyn again too much after that. I think it kind of pissed. They
You're
thought
like, you guys should have been driving him down.
Yeah,
or
they
a
should have
team
driven him down and
manager or
sent me up with
somebody.
another crew.
Right,
I was just always felt like. It was just a bad situation all around. That kid shouldn't even have been there.
Right.
They should. You don't bring kids out from the East Coast and throw them out to the wolves like that.
Yeah.
And he sent him out with 2 guys that know Baker so well as Todd and Dave.
Yeah.
You know, and expect this kid to perform.
Poor kid.
And this is no slight on Paul and those guys. Paul Farrell is a great guy. He's always been one of the nicest people.
He's so nice.
Yeah, the entire team. Those guys are all legends in the sport. They've done amazing things with Mervyn, and Paul was just one of the nicest dudes. I never held any animosity towards them. I was just kind of bummed. I wanted to be up there shooting.
Yeah.
This kid almost kills himself.
That's what you're
And
there
then
for,
they kind of put it on me that it had happened. You know, you got to take care of your crew. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? I mean, this kid, I told the guy to get speed. I'm like, you got to punch it and you got to make the gap. And he just did not even close to listening to what I said.
Oh, no.
Even the other guys were down there going, you got to point it, you know? And it's like,
Point. Oh, not like that.
yeah. I mean, he rolls off. It's just all, And it was just,
dude.
I was like, oh God. And when he came over in all this red snow, I was like, I was just a total facepalm.
Bummer.
But I can honestly say that I can't really recall anyone else getting damaged on my watch. And
you didn't get damaged.
No,
like,
I didn't
poor
get
Bud.
damaged.
Bud got landed on by fucking
by Grammy. Yeah, that was pretty rough.
That sounds absolutely horrible.
Yeah, there was some, you put yourself in the line of fire being a photographer out there. And, if you're not paying attention to, and people are hitting the jump and just being wildcats
well,
out
also, you're on a long enough timeline, we've all had it where you're like, all right, do I go to the left or the right? And then the guy goes to the right, and then you go to the right, and he's like, I mean, to my right.
Yeah, skier's
and you're
right.
Like, fuck, I'm landing on rocks now, or whatever.
Yeah, it
like,
happens.
It happens a lot. So I think that was actually one of those situations where, I think both Graham and Bud blame Parada. I think Parada was like, come on down, dude.
Yeah, just go for it.
It's all clear, whatever.
Yeah.
Go huge. And he went huge right on to fucking Bud.
That was too bad.
And
that kind of changed Bud's career too, his career path.
His life, I think,
really
right? Because he's paralyzed on one side of his whole
damaged,
body. Yeah, such a bummer. But he's not bitter about it.
No,
that's nice.
And that's the nature of Bud. He's never let him hold him back or keep him from finding the stoke.
Yeah, he invites me down to his place to hang out when I go down to Mount Hood, and
that's awesome.
I never miss it because fuck, he's Bud, dude.
Yeah.
Bud Fawcett, a legend.
Yeah.
So the book that you've got, tell me where the listeners can buy it.
The book, you can get it on Amazon, and I will say it. I'm not a huge Amazon fan. I believe they're in many ways the devil. The Amazon, Facebook, these giant corporations aren't my favorite. However, they do run an operation called KDP, which is a self-publishing operation, and they provide authors, photographers, the opportunity to publish your own book without a huge expense.
Cool.
If you know anything about working in InDesign, Adobe InDesign, and Photoshop, and you can manage to put together your own transcript, you can basically put together a book for free if you have the content. And
Sick.
So that's one of the advantages of KDP. And then, obviously Amazon's one of the largest platforms for selling books in the world. Mm-hmm. They're all over the world. And so as much as you want to hate on Amazon, which I've done plenty of, at the end of the day, you have to acknowledge the fact that they've created this amazing platform for young, up-and-coming authors and photographers and to sort of have control of their own destiny. By putting out these books and not being under the guise or under the control of like a large publisher that's going to take advantage of you. So this book is available on Amazon. You look up my name, Sean Sullivan Lines. You can see it there. There's two versions. This one has Pat A on the cover, doing his seminal hand plant here at Mount Hood. It's also got Tracy Ladson, Jamie Lynn, Tom Burt, Craig Kelly and then the photo of Craig on the back. Some great photos in here. I do signed copies too, so if people want to get a hold of me by DM, they can reach out to me.
Sick.
And I'll find them a copy and I'll sign one over to them. Kind of like I did here. I'll try to sign it personally to whoever orders the book.
So sick.
Yeah.
So sick, Sean. I feel like we did full circle. How do you feel?
I feel good.
Did we touch everything?
No, it's been a great time. I really appreciate being here. I do want to shout out to some of the people that have really helped me, make my way through this crazy world. Doug Palladini was the editor at Snowboarder magazine for the time I was there, and he was a hugely positive influence on me.
Palladini's the man, dude.
And he's had a little bit of a rough ride just recently, with some health issues and stuff, but it seems like he's really pulled it together for himself. And he rose to the absolute upper echelon of the action sports industry, being the president of Vans and all that. So I got to give him a huge high five for all the amazing things he's accomplished. And you know what? He's been when I do books like this and I work for magazines and stuff. His influence on me as an editor and a publisher at Snowboarder and the things I learned from him have played a huge role in how I've approached publishing and doing these things. I took so many lessons from him and the people that worked at Snowboarder. So Mark Sullivan, Pat Bridges, these guys who worked at the mag and were influenced. Aaron Draplin, is an amazing artist. Aaron and I have had our ups and downs over the years, but I have nothing but amazing things to say about him. He's one of the most gifted artists in the world as far as graphic design, and he designed the first Lines book for me, and so I'm eternally grateful to him for the hard work that he's put in and the positive influence he's had on me. I wanted to mention Jason Bassrich from Mount Baker. I mentioned that to you. I wanted to, he posts up on Instagram every single day. He's got these funny little self-interviews he does. He turns the camera on himself.
Bass. He's
and
the best.
Bass is, I would advise everybody to watch Bass's daily little broadcast that he does. They're light, they're funny, they're poignant, they fit the moment. And he's just a smart, funny dude who has, a supreme knowledge of snowboarding. He comes from the heart of the Northwest, Mount Vernon, Mount Baker. The Oi boys from Mount Baker were some of the original hardcore snowboarders, Mount Baker hardcores. He was one of Craig's friends when Craig was growing up, and he's grown up under the influence of the entire Mount Baker world. And so you got to give him a lot of respect and a lot of props for ending up being the person that he was. Him and Jason Loeb, Bass and Loeb were iconic kids coming up, and those guys put in a lot of the lines at Baker on a snowboard in the early days, and their influence is still felt up there. And so big shout out to those guys and everyone else who has helped me along the way. I'm just grateful and I'm thankful to all of you for putting up with me and putting up with my bombastic attitude and my hot moments. And I hope I've been a positive influence on a lot of people out there in the world. I hope that my attempts to give back and make good on the bridges I have burned over the years, which there aren't a ton of them, but I've in my later years, I've always tried to look at the world as a place where you got to be positive influence. Don't take anything personal. Try to build great relationships with people, and I've taken that to heart. And so I hope that translates into things I do and say out in the world.
Fuck yeah, dude. That was epic.
Right on.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Fuck yeah, Sean.
Thanks for having me out.
Yeah, we'll have you on again, man.
Awesome.
I hope that the book goes really well. You've got a DJ gig tonight here
I'm
in
excited
Seattle.
about that. I'll be playing at Flammable tonight here in Seattle.
Super sick.
At Chop Suey. So this thing probably won't be out, obviously before. But but I'm excited to play, and I really appreciate you coming down, you and your daughter, to come down and do this interview.
Yeah,
so
she's doing DJ stuff, so we're excited to go to a DJ event together. So
very cool.
We're stoked, man. Thanks, Sean.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
FNRad shoutouts this week to Sean Sullivan. Thank you for the tickets to your DJ set at Chop Suey in Seattle. That was a fun time. If you've listened all the way to the end of the show and you can afford it, go buy the pre-sale of Eric Blem's The Darkest White book right now. It's the story of Craig Kelly, and it's amazing. Tag 1910 in any FNRad post for a chance to win a 1910 hoodie. And tag New Greens for a free sample of the best tasting organic green drink on the market. I drink it nearly every day and I love it. Be sure to come back next week for a very special episode of FNRad Snowboarding with Eric Blem, presented by Skyview Campers and brought to you by FNRad Productions.